In 2023, an international scan team using muon tomography and gravimetric imaging made a discovery so strange it almost didn't make it to print. Beneath the Giza plateau, nearly 2 kilometers down, they detected a chain of cavities stretching in perfect sequence beneath the Great Pyramid, smooth-walled and geometrically exact. No magma tubes, no fault lines, no natural explanation. To geologists, it was an anomaly. To engineers, a blueprint. When the data were overlaid with the pyramid's internal plan, every node of resonance, the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the so-called Queen's Chamber, aligned with the cavities below like gears in a buried engine. It was as if the monument above was only the visible housing of something far larger, a machine built into the earth itself. Declassified acoustic surveys revealed a faint hum at 50 Hz, identical to the frequency that runs modern power systems, and chemical residue found in the lower chambers, traces of zinc hydrochloric salts and crystallized hydrates, hinted that gas reactions might once have filled the interior, producing hydrogen that could amplify resonance or carry electrical charge. Follow that trail underground and the geometry continues. Muon scans show the cavities running toward the south, in the direction of Hawara, the site ancient writers called the Labyrinth, said to hold 3,000 chambers and a buried pyramid within. If those passages connect, they may form the oldest engineered network on Earth, a circulatory system for pressure, sound, and light. And that raises the question no one dares ask in print. If the Great Pyramid was part of a larger system, what was it designed to power? Was it an energy plant that drew from the Earth's magnetic pulse, lighting cities now lost to time? A stabilization array that kept the planet's climate or crust in balance? Or something stranger still, a global mechanism meant to tune consciousness itself, a harmonic bridge between human rhythm and planetary resonance? Whatever it was, the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. The Great Pyramid wasn't built on the Earth. It was built with it, a silent engine whose heartbeat may still be echoing through the stone, waiting for someone to listen. But first, before we begin, if you find yourself genuinely pulled towards stories of mystery, conspiracy, and forgotten lore, please consider subscribing. And if you truly like tonight's story, a gentle press on the new hype button sure does go a long way to keep these journeys coming. And with that said, let's step inside tonight's story. We begin standing behind a glass wall in a European lab where the lights never flicker. On the central monitor, pale lines and blocks begin to cohere, stacking into a pattern that looks planned instead of random. A physicist leans closer, fingers pressed white against the desk edge, and the room draws tight. "That can't be natural," he mutters, barely above a breath. Chairs stop rolling. Coffee cups hover halfway to lips. The faint click of detectors keeps time while the screen reveals row after row of geometry, marching under the Sahara as if a draftsman sketched them with a steady hand. It starts with particles that never sleep. Cosmic muons, tiny messengers born in the upper atmosphere, rain through stone and sand, their paths counted by dense plates in sealed frames. Fewer counts mean denser matter. More counts hint at empty space. Alongside them, gravimetric sensors feel for minute changes in pull, the soft tug of mass shifting underfoot. Two tools, two languages, they rarely rhyme. Here, they begin to sing the same tune. Every notch in the muon tally matches a dip in gravity, and each dip falls into a vertical line centered under the Great Pyramid. The early reconstructions look rough. Then resolution tightens with new runs and longer exposures. What emerges is not a blob or a cave. It is a ladder of cavities, one above another, a central shaft of hollows dropping far below any known chamber. Each void lines up with the pyramid's central axis to a degree that makes even patient people scowl. Stone that old should lean, crack, wander over time. These lines hold true. If the build began on a flat plateau, something continues beneath it. Not rubble, not fractures, a design. Details filter through technical notes before anyone picks up the phone. The angles match known slopes. The spacing repeats at intervals that look rhythmic. A cluster sits directly below a point that, above ground, squares with the Grand Gallery. Another rests farther down the line, as if echoing the King's Chamber, but beneath the bedrock. Gravimetric maps fade from warm to cool like a weather chart, yet the shape stays crisp even as instruments change. The pattern refuses to smear, then the gate tightens. Internal emails mark entire sections of the data for further verification. That's normal enough, until weeks pass and early drafts vanish. A French engineer's preprint that showed clean linear walls kilometres down is scrubbed from the project drive. The later version talks about known features, safe ground. The deepest anomalies just stop appearing. Official notes lean on words like calibration and confounders. Caution, of course, has its place, but the gaps look too tidy. Outside the main team, smaller arrays keep listening. A university group in Japan runs a silent parallel with refurbished detectors shipped from an old neutrino lab, stacking months of counts for patience instead of speed. In Chile, a high-altitude station pointed at standard rocks for a baseline turns its gaze on Giza as a favour to a friend, then keeps watching after the favour ends. Their plots develop the same stubborn lines. The Egyptian ministry issues short statements that lean on sensor calibration, a phrase that explains little and answers nothing. The arrays do not argue, they simply nod with more data. The story steps out of the lab and into a dim cafe in Cairo. A ceiling fan churns warm air salted with coffee and dust. At a corner table, a reporter waits with a notebook face down. A technician arrives late, eyes red at the edges, and slides a small drive across the table with 2 fingers, like it carries heat. "Layered corridors, not caves," he says, and the words come out dry. The reporter taps the metal with a thumbnail. "Why the hush?" The man shrugs and looks past her to the door. "Because if we're right, we're not studying tombs anymore." On that drive, the raw matrices render into sections of space that look like vertebrae. Long corridors stack like a spine, with joint-like widenings, each shift measured in regular steps. Some hollows mirror the pyramid's outer profile, but inverted, as if someone traced the monument and pressed its ghost below the ground. The image invites a thought you can feel in your chest, an unseen twin of the pyramid, not above, but beneath, reaching down. Some whisper this depth was the point all along. If surface stones were the lid, the machine sat under the lid. Supporters suggest those lower voids acted like receivers in a resonance circuit. The pyramid hums up top, low and steady, recorded by tourists with phones and by careful teams with better gear. If that vibration had a path into the earth, those hidden spaces might soak it, store it, pass it along. It's a soft claim, hedged and uneasy. Others dismiss it as pareidolia dressed in math, but the symmetry holds when the light shifts. Lines remain lines. The lab notes keep a separate rhythm. The 2017 scan pyramids work already found a long cavity above the Grand Gallery. That one is real and published. It forced fresh questions about structure and purpose, since it sits where no simple load relief is needed. The new runs, 2023 into 2024, extend the map in 2 ways at once: inward to refine known anomalies, and downward to explore the bedrock. Methods multiply: muon counts, gravity shifts, even radar from carefully chosen angles that can tolerate thick limestone. Each method has limits. Together they sketch the same map. Arguments pour over the border between caution and fear. Data can mislead. Instruments drift. Calibration matters. All true. Yet the tighter the filters, the clearer the vertical line grows. Names drop from drafts. Conference abstracts soften their verbs. A footnote links to server folders that return error codes. The tone moves from curious to careful, and then to quiet. Secrets do not stay buried forever. Here, they sink into layers of paperwork instead of sand. The human scale stays small. A technician in rubber-soled shoes kneels to tighten a cable on a detector box buzzing against the floor. A young analyst eats yogurt at her station at 2 a.m, while she redraws the same figure for the 6th time to flatten a spike that never flattens. Someone puts on a sweater against the steady cold of the lab, then forgets it there when called to a meeting. These tiny scenes ground the grand claim. People who do not sleep enough keep showing up, even as their work vanishes from summaries. The architecture in the renderings grows stranger the longer you sit with it. The corridors do not snake like erosional tubes. They run true, change width at clean thresholds, and repeat at distances that resemble musical intervals more than geology. Where the Great Pyramid narrows, a gap below widens. Where the upper chambers cluster, the map below holds spaces that reflect them in reverse. The pair looks like a key and a lock, or a map and a scale. Critics counter that natural fissures can look straight on a coarse grid. They point to stacking artifacts where processing algorithms carve false edges out of noise. They reference known mines and shafts dug in later ages. These pushbacks have weight. The counter to the counter, though, is that independent teams using different tools report the same returns, and the shapes hold across beam angles. The chance of 3 independent mistakes producing identical geometry is not zero. It is simply small. A thought returns in a new coat. If the pyramid rings like a bell in certain frequencies, what happens when those tones meet tuned empty space below? Acoustic engineers talk about standing waves, places where energy gathers and stays. Some whisper those lower cavities were designed to meet the hum, not merely survive it. If true, you get a layered circuit made of air and stone, with the desert's own low tremor as its heartbeat. The lab's ventilators whir. Somewhere, a printer spits out a last page and goes still. We do not have a clean public map from entrance to deepest chamber. We do not have permissions to drill. What we have are consistent shadows drawn by particles and gravity, a pattern that repeats when instruments change hands. Down in the cafe, the technician's thumb draws a slow line along the table's edge. He says no one wants to claim too much. Then he smiles with one corner of his mouth and says it again, final this time, corridors. The idea that the Great Pyramid doesn't just sit on the earth, but locks into it rises like a simple sentence in the mind. Maybe the limestone casing and granite heart are only the visible power end, with the real work buried in the cool dark beneath. Maybe this is why the outer geometry meets measures that echo music. Those shapes might be less about mass and more about flow, sound, pressure, charge. It's one thing to laugh at a myth. It's another to watch a monitor draw it in a language of counts per second. Official notes continue to favour conservatism. Public releases mention known voids and revisit them in careful prose. Camera crews film surface stones. Meanwhile, the underground maps update with quiet regularity in backrooms around the world. Not style, not fireworks, just new dots, slightly clearer lines, small confirmations. The work is slow. Patience is a kind of courage here. Back at the lab, the physicist finally leans away from the screen and exhales. Someone clears a throat. The room relaxes a fraction, but the stillness keeps a grip. It is late or early. Impossible to tell. The data will have to speak through careful papers and long peer review. Yet the image formed already argues a simple point. The space below is not blank. It has structure that argues for intent, or at least for a natural process no one has named yet. Think of the old discovery above the Grand Gallery, that large void placed where stress relief made little sense. Now set it beside a ladder of cavities aligned beneath the central axis, at depths no masons ever recorded. The two together sketch a larger figure. The pyramid might be less a building and more a node, plugged into a buried array that does not end at the base. If that is even partly right, our questions turn from what is inside to what does the inside connect to. The pattern tilts in the light, and its meaning sharpens. Maybe the Great Pyramid isn't a monument built on the earth. Maybe it's the tip of something built into it. If that hidden section is a receiver, an organ for sound and pressure, we need to learn what signal it was built to hear. To understand what those hidden chambers might do, we must examine how ancient perfection in stone coexists with calculated emptiness inside. Dawn hangs cool over the plateau. The air has that chalky bite it gets before the heat rises, and the stone smells faintly of dust and old rain. Your palm finds the face of a block near ankle height. The limestone is cold and smooth, the joints so tight your fingernail can't find a lip. A small laser level sweeps a red line and hiccups at the seam, then settles as if the rock refuses to admit it exists. Each block weighs more than a bus. Each one sits with a patience that makes your wrist slow down. You walk along the base while the desert holds its breath. The joints repeat the trick. Line, no gap, another line. No mortar leaks, no bulged corners. It is careful work, almost quiet in the way it hides the work. Near the northeast corner the ground feels firmer. Old casing stones once flashed in sun here, quarried from Tura, bright as bleached bone. Now only traces of that skin remain, but the precision still speaks. It lives in the edges you can't quite see. That exactness is where the puzzle starts. Builders who could lay stone like this also carved vast hollows inside. Not smooth halls, but voids that keep the shape of raw cutting. Tomb logic says seal and contain. Lock the air, slow decay. These gaps hint at the opposite. They look like places where something would move. Air, sound, pressure. They feel like lungs. You duck at the low entrance. Warm breath brushes your cheek. Old air in a narrow run. You shuffle sideways and count your steps by the rasp of your sleeve on stone. Then the passage lifts. The light thins and a larger space gathers ahead. A throat that leads you upward. The grand gallery climbs like a staircase tilted too steep to trust. Its steps are smooth from 1,000 souls. High above your head, an unseen chamber runs parallel, almost the same length as the gallery itself. The scans called it a long void, 30 meters, big enough for 2 trucks end to end, big enough that a small passenger jet could rest inside if you stripped the wings. It follows the outer slope of the pyramid, sealed in, angled just as the casing once angled. No entry, no door. It doesn't sag or scatter like a collapsed pocket. It holds a clean line, the way a planned space does. That line presses on the question. Why cut a cavity that repeats the outer form? Why mirror the angle inside the stone? Later, in a shaded alcove, a structural engineer opens a notebook. The pencil bites and flicks as she draws 2 triangles nested together, their angles matching the slope. She traces a set of rays from the lower chamber toward the void, then marks small arrows that bounce upward. Angle becomes amplifier, she says softly. Not a crush breaker, a funnel. The official phrase, pressure relief, floats there, tidy and simple. Her sketch pushes back. Relief would be shorter, thicker, placed where force spreads. This is the opposite. Slender, persistent, tuned to a direction. You stand at the rail in the gallery and listen to the room breathe. Air moves in slow bands that feel like a draft and not a draft. The walls lean in with a 7-step pattern, stacked ceilings that repeat at measured intervals. Designed empty places do things. A flute is a tube of nothing with a sound wrapped around it. A reactor is a space for neutrons to wander. Negative space is where the action gathers. These stone hollows wear that logic like a badge you only see when you stop looking for gold or sarcophagi. A local guide clears his throat and offers what most tours still offer, built as a tomb for the king. He is kind, and his voice holds pride. The engineer beside him lowers her voice and answers the air more than him. No tomb requires tuned cavities. Her words land without a fight. Both can stand there for a moment. Belief on one side, geometry on the other. The gallery lets both speak and makes neither loud. Measurements give you handles. The long void above mirrors ratios that instrument makers know by habit. Length against height sits near intervals you find in organ pipes, the kind that favour steady, low notes. The place where it begins lines up with points in the gallery, where sound likes to pause and pile, a node, as studio folks say. If you bring a tone in, the room gives it back with interest. The void's angle would catch that rising motion and keep it moving. The Great Pyramid owns a neat trick the earlier pyramids at Meidum and Saqqara do not. Their interiors feel thrown together by weather and time, with bends that wobble and chambers that don't sit along a single spine. Giza is a spine. The passages and chambers cling to one axis with simple stubbornness. The hollows feel measured, not incidental. That coherence often reads like intent, a map that sticks to one ruler. Here and there, the physics world brushes the stone. Acoustic surveys speak of shared frequencies in the King's Chamber and the gallery that match Earth's background pulse, called the Schumann resonance. That pulse hums low and slow, like far thunder that never arrives. Some whisper the builders could have found those tones by ear and feel. Others dismiss the notion as neat coincidence with no deeper meaning. The truth perhaps sits in the fact that these rooms hold those tones well. They fit the key. Your hand returns to the wall. The granite higher up differs from the limestone down here. It holds crystals that prefer stress. But stay with the void for a moment. Its placement matters. It hugs the slope where the casing ran, as if it wanted a dialogue with the skin. You think of how a guitar's body shapes the string's note. The string vibrates, but the hollow wood gives the sound its reach. If the casing once completed the form, then the void might have worked with that outer layer, a pair made of stone and space. You crouch to look through a small crack in the gallery's railing, not a break, just a seam where blocks meet, and your eye can see a different plane. Nothing moves, yet the room carries a feeling like held breath at the end of a phrase. Designed emptiness often feels like that. A readiness rather than lack. Even the dust collects along lines that hint at flows. This isn't proof, it's texture. The engineer flicks the pencil again and shows a small overlay. The long void above, the gallery below, then the King's Chamber tucked farther on. She taps the spot where a calculated standing wave might crest if driven from below. It lands beneath that sealed space like a soft footfall on a staircase. If vibration travelled upward, the angle would push it onward instead of letting it spill and die. Critics counter that any cavity might do that. But this one mirrors outer geometry and holds a scale that suggests care. Outside, the sky brightens from cobalt to pale blue. A bird scolds. The guide checks his watch and reminds you that groups will soon flood the passage. For a last quiet beat, you let the paradox hold. Precision outside. Roughness inside. Tomb logic versus circulation logic. The latter keeps finding more places to live. Salt on lower walls where water once moved. Shafts that are small, direct and strange for ventilation. Features that behave like roots rather than air holes. There is another echo, this time from other stones across the desert and across centuries. The chaos of Meidum and Saqqara suggests trial. The spine of Giza suggests landing. Design that grew up. If so, the empty spaces are not sloppy, they are tuned. When you touch the blocks, you can feel the confidence in that choice. Not arrogance, more like a groove. It's tempting to leap ahead and say what the emptiness is for. Better to note what it does. It sets conditions. It aligns angles. It holds proportions that invite resonance. It sits exactly where energy would want to travel if you pushed on the base of the system. That is how instruments behave. They are waiters. They are ready. Down in the cooler passage, your shoulder brushes damp stone. The guide's flashlight paints a line along a seam and finds nothing to catch. You think about the nested triangles again, and how a simple sketch can change a claim. A relief chamber disperses, an amplifier collects. The line between those two ideas is as thin as the joint at your fingertips, yet it changes the story you tell yourself as you climb. Some accounts suggest the big cavity might be a second gallery, or a place to slide blocks. Others dismiss all that as distractions from a stable explanation. Your feet meet the steps one by one, and with each rise, the gallery takes your breath and gives it back. The space performs, not loudly, just enough that a low tone would have a place to live. The void above seems to nod along to that performance, unheard but felt in the geometry. At the upper landing, you pause and let the sound fade to a thin afterring. The headlamp of another visitor throws a brief arc across the ceiling and then vanishes. The air cools by a degree, a small thing, but the body notices when a space shifts how it holds heat and breath. The void above might share in that subtle climate, sealed yet present the way a second room behind a wall changes the one you stand in. Maybe the emptiness was the point. If so, the natural next question isn't what it supports, but what it listens for. And once you ask that, your ear turns downward, toward the darker rooms, where anything that speaks would speak in long, slow waves. Your knees ache against cold granite as the little speaker touches stone. The grand gallery rises around you like a narrow canyon, air cool and dry, the scent of dust and old limestone mixing with the faint plasticky smell of new equipment. A low tone spills out and hangs there. It doesn't fade the way sound usually dies in a hallway. It folds back. The room's long throat seems to inhale and exhale, breathless and steady, as if the walls themselves are finding their note. You feel it first in your chest, not loud, but present, like a hand tapping gently on your ribs in time, eyelids lower. People stop shifting their weight. That steady tone thickens until it feels less like hearing and more like standing inside a slow tide. No one speaks because there's nothing to say. You can tell it's not a trick of echo. It's the geometry doing work. Stone responding to frequency. Architecture designed not only to hold weight, but to shape air. Acoustic engineers describe what unfolds in here as standing waves, patterns that lock in only when a space carries just right proportions. The gallery's long slope and 7 overlapping ceilings produce a stair-step effect above you, each ledge catching and sending sound onward. One voice meets the next. Energy stacks. They call it a harmonic cascade, and in this corridor the term moves from paper to body. The mid-tones ride the roof, the lower ones crawl the floor, and you stand on a ridge between them feeling the interference lines kiss your skin. Think of a pipe organ, they whisper, but made of granite and air. Each notch in the side ramps, each shallow groove, becomes an air column with its own overtone. Alone they would be thin. Together they reinforce. One overtone boosts another until the air itself hums without a musician. No wind chests, no ranks of metal pipes, just a long stone throat holding its breath, while sound grows its own bones. In 2021, a team from the University of Cadiz set microphones along the gallery floor and recorded sustained resonances at 117 Hz and 210 Hz. They also captured a deep, almost below-hearing fundamental that matched Earth's background frequency. Those aren't magic numbers, just stubborn ones. Frequencies that stay put and don't wash away with the shuffle of feet or the cough of a guide. In a place like this, fixed tones matter because they can ride any energy you introduce. If you give the room a whisper, it can return a hum. A visiting singer once tried a single note here and watched it bloom out of him. 12 seconds later, the tail still floated thin and steady, like a held tone from a steady hand. He leaned against the wall afterward, shaking his head, not from fear but from the oddness of getting a duet from stone. Human breath met engineered acoustics, and the chamber answered as if it had been waiting for that pitch to arrive. Critics say the stepped design kept the roof from sagging as the pyramid settled, that the gallery is only a structural throat and nothing more. Engineers who study the layout nod to the need for strength, then point to the precision. If you wanted to brace a long void, you could do it with less. The repeating angles, the clean module in step widths, the consistent ceiling overlaps, those are choices. Choices that happen to make sound behave, not just stone sit still. Now watch a simulation. Not a glossy video for tourists, a simple 3D model that treats the chamber like a waveguide. Set the input as a low rumble coming from beneath the plateau. the kind of slow vibration that water produces when it moves under pressure through narrow passages, or a sub-Earth tremor that doesn't crack anything, just nudges. In the model, those long waves climb the gallery the way wind follows a flute's tube. They focus. They run uphill as if the geometry invites them to do so, the energy aimed not at the entrance but toward the king's chamber waiting above. 19th century travellers wrote about torches that flickered oddly in here, even when there was no draught, and about moments of dizziness or a strange buoyant mood that arrived for no obvious reason. Modern acousticians note that low-frequency sound, the kind you feel more than hear, can do that to the nervous system. It can shift blood pressure for a beat or two, stir a hint of euphoria or unease, make flame dance even in still air. What seemed like superstition reads now like body notes taken in a time before decibels. The steps themselves become characters. Your fingers run along an edge and you feel wear that isn't quite foot polish, more like a soft rounding where air has rolled for centuries. Between steps, shallow channels catch the tone and send it slantwise. The 7-layered ceilings overhead don't meet in spikes. They lay like shelves, each one offering a platform for sound to bank and rejoin. That repetition is the trick. One shelf copies the last and the wave learns the route. Supporters suggest the void above the grand gallery wasn't random either. The length-to-height ratio noted by survey teams matches harmonic intervals found in pipe organs. More curious still, its placement lines up with the acoustic nodes measured here in the gallery below. If the space above accepts what this corridor sends, then the two form a pair, sender and receiver arranged along one inclined line, tuned like an instrument built into a wall. Keep it physical, your shirt vibrates. The tiny speaker barely whispers, yet the note hangs, and everyone's breath begins to slow. One person rubs at a forearm where hairs rise and settle. Another tilts his head as if making room in the ear for something wider. No one checks a phone. Live rooms have that effect when they cross from architecture to instrument. They pull attention the way a river pulls floating leaves toward its seam. The Cadiz survey's numbers matter here because they anchor the idea that the space isn't just echo-friendly, it's frequency selective. 117 Hz lingers like a low chant. 210 rises as a clean overtone. The slow subaudible bass sits underneath and ties them together. Those three form a ladder. Give them any stimulus, voice, drum skin, water murmur, and the gallery insists on answering in its own measure. If you step toward the far end and turn back, the throat narrows your sightline until the distant entrance is a small rectangle of darker dark. The air feels denser through here, not thick like humidity, but more deliberate, as if the corridor had pressure without wind. That sensation can be trick of mind, or it can be the micro-pressures of standing waves doing what standing waves do, making soft pockets where air doesn't flow so much as quiver. Others dismiss this as pareidolia for ears, the auditory version of seeing shapes in clouds. But the modelling doesn't rely on hope. Give any space a set of hard numbers, and you can predict how sound will behave. This one does what it's built to do. It reflects at the right points, couples at the right surface lengths, and keeps loss lower than a rough chamber would. Add shape, and you add meaning. Back to the singer. He returns to a middle step and picks a different pitch, higher, brighter. The room doesn't carry it as far. It turns brittle, and after 4 seconds, it's gone. The message is plain. There are notes the chamber favours and notes it does not. That's how instruments talk. Even crude ones built of bone or wood. Even ones made of granite under a mountain of stone. Skeptical Egyptologists keep to their line. This is engineering for weight and angle, not for tone. They suggest that if sound performs well here, that's a byproduct, a lucky side effect of a solution to a structural problem. The counter-argument from structural specialists is less romantic and more demanding. You don't repeat a specific step and ceiling pattern down a long incline unless you need its particular behaviour. If the only goal were to hold the mass above, fewer courses and simpler joints would have done the job with surplus safety. we should consider what energy, besides voice, moves this space. Low-frequency vibrations travel, especially through stone. Water in constricted passages pounds like a drumhead when it meets resistance. That effect, hydraulic hammer, throws little pulses into whatever it touches. If such pulses rose into the gallery through bedrock, they'd be sorted and sent upward by these walls toward the chamber that waits at the top of the line. There's a quiet logic to it. A corridor built to carry, shelves that behave like mirrors, steps that coax the air into lanes. If you've stood beside an old church organ and felt the floorboard tremble when the pedal notes hit, you know the feeling. This is that sensation slowed down and stretched long, heat removed, sound turned into a clean, cool force that doesn't exhaust itself right away. Travel writing from the 1800s, sometimes lush and sometimes grumpy, talks about candlelight that made halos in here when held low and tight, circles that seemed to pulse without smoke. Those notes read differently once you know about infrasound flutter and how flames react to small standing pressures. They aren't proofs, just hints that people felt the room work on them long before oscilloscopes and laptops. The technician lifts the speaker away and the tone dies in a gentle afterring. It doesn't snap off, it descends. Boots scrape, someone clears a throat and the spell loosens. The gallery returns to its usual state, cool, high, and patient. But the memory of the body feel stays. That is the kind of evidence that doesn't sit in a drawer. It travels in a person and returns when the person returns to the place. In the cross-section you can't see with eyes, the vibration looks like strands. Thin ropes of energy rise up the incline, bright where the sound finds a node, dim where it skips. Those threads gather under the upper void, then aim toward the chamber that wears granite inlined with crystal. The picture is tidy. It needs a driver. Resonance is motion that has somewhere to go. It's a car coasting on a hill. It keeps rolling because the path favours it. But something has to push first. Something steady, strong enough to seed the tone, subtle enough not to tear the room apart. The gallery shows you how motion could be shaped and sent onward. The question still waiting in the cool air is simple and heavy. What pressed the first breath into the stone and kept it moving through the dark below? The air underground is cool and damp, the kind that clings to your skin and turns dust into paste. Your boots scuff over rough stone, and then a small sound cuts through the tunnel's quiet. A steady tap like fingers on glass. The maintenance worker lifts his light toward a hairline crack in the wall. Not grit, not mud. A thin ribbon of water slides out, catching the beam and glinting as if it carries its own faint glow. It runs across the floor in a narrow path that wasn't there last week, feeding a shallow pool no one logged on any map. Follow it a few steps deeper and the tunnel breathes colder. The light finds more dark threads on the wall, the kind left when mineral water dries and salts bloom in feathery streaks. The worker kneels, wets a finger and rubs a chalky crust that breaks like old sugar. It tastes wrong on the air, metallic, tickling the back of the nose. You hear the faintest hiss, not a leak so much as a whisper. Water under pressure. Somewhere beyond the cut stone is a pocket, and beyond that more pockets linked in a body no one has charted fully. Modern surveys point to a hidden network beneath the plateau, a layered aquifer tied to branches of the old Nile. The ground here is not simply dry bedrock, it breathes on a longer clock. When the river swells upstream, the water table rises. When the river slims, the table falls. Those shifts aren't random. They move in seasons, in cycles, forming pressure zones that swell and relax. It means the space under your feet has its own pulse. It means the pyramid's foundation sits above a living system, water pushing and easing through limestone channels the way air moves through a set of lungs. Supporters suggest this isn't just geology. Flowing water squeezed by stone doesn't simply pass along quietly. In tight channels it drags on the walls. Ions rub and drift. Tiny charges build and release. Friction translates motion into vibration. That's the seed of a hydraulic engine. a natural power source that requires no metal turbines and no wires, only a gradient, a path, and time. Others dismiss it as romantic physics. Still, when you stand there and feel the floor faintly tremble in a regular beat, it's hard to ignore the possibility that water could feed a larger design. There's a well-known effect in piping called a hydraulic hammer. Close a valve too fast and a shockwave slams the system. Stone does its own version. Water hits tight joints, then rebounds. Each impact sends a low-frequency impulse through the rock. Those waves don't stop at one room, they travel. Sensitive instruments have picked up pulses from single events miles away. If a natural or managed flow once moved beneath the plateau, those impacts could have marched upward into any tuned cavities above, filling them with the kind of slow, strong beat that large chambers love. Let the light sweep across the lower passages inside the monument. Narrow shafts run off at careful angles, some end blind, some meet the belly of the structure again. Tomb logic says these are symbolic or for spirit travel. The sound in your chest says they might carry more than air. Supporters suggest the passages could have worked as channels for vapour, or as ducts that coupled the ground's rumble with the chamber's acoustics. Vapour and tone sometimes lock together when the geometry is right. That coupling can lift faint motion into audible energy, the way a whisper grows loud inside a well-tuned horn. The walls tell their own story when watched up close. Salt efflorescence blossoms on certain stones, not random, but in repeating bands along lower rooms. Those crystals need water to arrive in solution, and then enough time to grow when the water evaporates. They form where flow concentrates. It is hard to square heavy salt bloom with a dry sealed grave. It fits better with a system that saw regular moisture, perhaps even pressure. You can trace the lines with a fingertip. They curve and ladder as if marking where water once climbed and then fell back again. There's a human timeline to this as well. In the 1960s, major changes upriver altered the Nile's season. Archaeologists on the plateau began to note new wet streaks on the lower walls, slow drips that had no recent precedent in their notes. The shift was catalogued as a conservation issue, a threat to stone. It was, and is. But set alongside the idea of a tuned environment, it also reads like a clue. If the site once relied on a particular rhythm of water, the new flattened river cycle could have broken whatever balance was there. You can stand in a chamber and feel the air hold its breath when this background beat rolls through. The air picks it up, though your ears don't quite. Some whisper that Egyptian texts describing primal waters, the waters of none, might preserve more than mythic poetry. Computer models of seasonal floods map onto frequencies that match the kind recorded in the upper rooms, near that stubborn 50 Hz tone. The match doesn't prove a machine lived here. It does place natural cycles and built spaces on the same staff, notes that could be played together. Critics counter that a tone is just a tone. Anything large with stone walls will prefer certain frequencies, and the earth hums at many. Fair enough. But when the underground flow swells, detectors in the chambers above tend to hear more. When the flow ebbs, the rooms go quiet and dull. The pattern isn't absolute, but it shows up often enough to lift an eyebrow. The worker with the flashlight doesn't know this. He only knows the floor is damp where it was dry, and that he is now told to mark a barrier and move on. A restoration engineer, older now, walks the baseline outside and points with a wooden ruler to places where casing has spooled. The edges crumble more where water collects. Modern drainage can't catch all of it. He says the waters chew now, not softly but with a disorder that scrapes. If there was ever a balance, a give and take between flow and stone, it seems gone. What was rhythmic is chaotic. That shift doesn't just threaten blocks. It could smother whatever faint conversation may still be going on between the deep and the chambers above. There's another thread to pull. If water moved, it might have carried passengers, not just dissolved salts, but gases produced lower down. In tight spaces where chemistry wakes, flow brings byproduct and pushes it along. It could be steam. It could be hydrogen from reactions those rooms encouraged. Some streaks and residues in middle levels don't read like dust alone. The taste at the back of the throat in certain niches has a sting that water alone doesn't explain. It's thin, but it hangs there, as if the air remembers an older job. Supporters suggest the shafts and galleries served as a coupled system where water beat matched air tone, and the mix drew gases along predictable paths. In such a design, a wave moving through limestone would pump in small pulses at a chamber above. The chamber would answer, and the gas would rise and fall, collecting where it could do useful work. Those cycles would need a steady source to keep them in time. Seasonal flood and fall could have provided that drummer, where the rise nudged the system into phase and the fall let it rest. The maintenance worker returns the next night with a second light and a small metal cup. He crouches, holds the cup to the hairline, and waits. A few drops ring into the bottom, each arrival a tiny strike you can hear. He tips it and watches a thin line crawl toward the rim. He doesn't run tests. He's told to report and to keep the floor clear. Still, his notes add one small piece to a growing ledger. Water is moving in from unmapped channels. It is not a flood. It is persistent. It arrives in beats. There are lessons from other places where stone and water talk. In mountain towns, old mills still sit over narrow streams, where a flow that looks modest turns a wheel all day. Underground caverns hold lakes that sigh as tides far away push and pull on the crust. Those systems don't need wires to do work, they need paths. The plateau seems to have such paths cut and natural. The question is whether they once met stone rooms built not to hold bodies, but to catch a rhythm. Others dismiss the whole hydraulic engine angle as wishful thinking. They point to the lack of obvious valves or sluices, to the simple fact that no ancient manual sits on a shelf. The absence of hardware is a fair note, but absence alone doesn't end the inquiry. Many processes can be self-regulating, using shape and material rather than moving parts. A bottle makes a tone when you blow across it. A cave hums when wind fits its mouth. Architecture can be a machine without looking like one. Back in the tunnel, the light catches a band where salts have grown thick in a year, laddering up the wall in crisp crystals. You notice the band sits at the same height as a shelf in the chamber above. If the water rises to here, the room above hears better. If it falls, the room hears less. It's a crude ruler, but it tells a story of linkages. The ground speaks with water. The water speaks with stone. The stone keeps the beat for the air. The air passes it along. So where does that leave us? With a worker's glint on a wet crack, with mineral bloom that proves motion, with a river whose new behaviour rearranged the subsurface's slow breath, and with a thought that refuses to leave. If the underground flow once stirred the galleries into motion, it likely carried more than vibration. It may have lifted reactants, gases, trace metals, and left behind thin signatures in rooms where nothing of a tomb belongs. Up the narrow passage where the air tightens and the stone turns from chalk to granite, the next clue waits in a chamber that tastes faintly of metal and old rain. Cold lab air tastes like chalk and metal. Fluorescent lights hum as a chemist in a grey coat balances a shallow dish on a mock limestone block. He lowers a strip of zinc into clear liquid, and a thin balloon trembles as bubbles gather and rise. The latex swells with steady patience, not a burst but a climb, pale against the stone. The room holds its breath. Glassware ticks softly as it cools. You can hear the faint wet fizz of metal giving itself up to acid. The balloon lifts, settles, then lifts again. It's simple, small, and strangely convincing. Supporters suggest this tabletop scene mirrors a larger intent. Christopher Dunn's model frames the Queen's chamber as a reaction vessel, not a royal bedroom. In that frame, zinc meets hydrochloric acid to form zinc chloride and hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is light, eager to move and indifferent to prayer or title. The theory places that gas is the medium that rises through the narrow shafts, upward toward the grand gallery's tuned geometry where vibration waits. It is a machine sketch, done in stone. It is chemistry stepping first, acoustics answering next. Look at the room's shape in the replica and then recall the real chamber. A gabled ceiling that doesn't read like a finished tomb, angles that seem to guide force rather than display art, and those slender, stubborn shafts that run from the chamber's walls toward the higher courses. They're too narrow for human passage and too straight to be casual. Some whisper they look less like ventilation and more like conduits, pathways for gas or pressure to move in controlled lines. On the walls, the replica shows faint stain bands at shoulder height, as if something once sat there and left a ghost. The real chamber bears its own marks, pale crusts and streaks that do not resolve neatly as smoke. 19th century visitors wrote of salts crusting certain surfaces and a bitter tang in the air. These notes are debated, but they persist in diaries and field letters. In recent years, a material specialist microanalyzed dust samples and reported zinc signatures that did not match local geology. That claim is controversial and invites replication, yet it adds a stubborn detail to the heap. It's one thing to dismiss a rumour, it's another to explain why it endures. If the chamber hosted cycles of controlled reaction, light salts might cling to pores in the stone long after the last vessel was cleared away. You can ground this discussion by returning to the lab. The chemist's hand hovers over the balloon's neck, pinching it off, weighing the pull. The smell riding the air is metallic and thin, the kind that lingers at the back of the throat. A visiting researcher notes how it stings a little, like breathing near a freshly scrubbed battery. He writes the sensation down, not as proof, but as a trace that refuses to fade. If you've ever walked into a room where a reaction just finished, you know how the air keeps a small memory of what passed through it. Critics counter with practical questions. Where are the jars, the basins, the vents? Where is the supply chain inside a sealed monument? No crucibles line the walls. No storage rooms hold powders. The chamber stands bare. Supporters answer with a different kind of economy. They argue for continuous processes housed within fitted mounts, for apparatus that left few parts behind, and for cycles that consume their own residue. Stone tolerates cleaning, and time scrubs even harder. What remains are the stubborn features that can't be removed without unbuilding the room: the shafts, the gable, the geometry. Hydrogen itself is quiet, but it loves to respond when music arrives. In radio work, engineers lean on a simple rule. Ionized hydrogen can strengthen electromagnetic fields when tuned to the right frequency. That's a principle, not a myth. The grand gallery above is a space where tones hang, fold, and feed back. Supporters suggest this is where the chamber's chemical product met the building's acoustic design. Hydrogen rising into a hive of harmonics would not need copper coils to participate. It would only need rhythm and room to move. Picture yourself kneeling in the real Queen's chamber by torchlight millennia ago. The torch runs low, and the air feels damp, not with rain, but with subtle breath from stone. At your elbow, set into the wall, a fitted assembly taps and releases regulated for hours, maybe days. Hydrogen fills the space slowly, pooling higher as it accumulates. The shafts begin their work as pressure lines. The room doesn't roar, it waits. Above you, the tuned throat of the gallery draws motion like a draft carries heat. The system wakes in steps, not in a flare. The lab balloon bobs against its tether. A student writes down the rate of rise, then tests the seal with a soft press. It holds. He glances at the reaction dish. The zinc is pitting, steady, predictable, converting material to gas in a measurable way. Some whisper that scale is the only difference. Carry this up to chamber size, align it with precise acoustics, feed it with a water-driven pulse from the plateau veins below, and you approach a loop. Input from below, medium in the middle, output above. Not a generator in the modern sense, but a stone device that translates one form of motion into another. Architects study the chamber's roofline with a different eye. A gable spreads load down and out. It also channels uplift. When pressure inside rises, the angle helps guide forces toward the apex and onward. The shafts exit near that logic, not by accident. It's as if the room's shape serves two masters, the weight of the pyramid and the drift of gas seeking escape. Those hard-to-access shafts complicate the tomb story and simplify the engine one. One narrative asks why the builders made them at all. The other asks how precisely they were made. A lab tech switches off the fan near the bench. The room settles to a true quiet. In that stillness, you can hear the low fizz again and the small tick of glass. For a moment, the imagination offers a bridge. In the pyramid, the accumulation phase ends. A slow release begins through the shafts. The gas rises into a zone tuned to accept waves and multiply them. As the gallery hums, the hydrogen responds. Once a field couples to that rhythm, you might see static climb a stone corner or feel hair lift along your forearm. The phenomenon isn't fancy, it's physics meeting design. The 19th century reports return like an after ring. Salt on the walls, a taste in the mouth, a headache that fades by the time they reach daylight. Others dismiss those notes as travel fatigue. It could be that. It could also be byproducts of reactions that once pulsed on schedule and then stopped. The modern dust analysis is a thin thread, but a thread nonetheless. If future tests confirm non-local zinc in concentrations beyond background noise, the chamber shifts again, from pure ritual space to something more complicated. For opponents of the model, contamination remains a clean answer. Tourists track minerals in, tools leave traces, a careless hand smudges a reading. That picture is plausible and caution is healthy. Yet the architecture stands no matter how the sampling debate goes. You can't track a shaft into a wall by foot traffic. You either cut it or you don't. These slender runs through stone have to be explained. Ventilation for the spirit does not require such angles. A pressure path or gas line does. In the lab, the chemist points to the balloon and then to the ceiling. She doesn't lecture, she lets the room notice the connection. Hydrogen rises, shafts rise. Rooms above ring at frequencies that many teams have recorded. Hydrogen in resonance is not a new age phrase. Radio technicians work with it. If the chamber below supplied the medium, the gallery and the spaces above could serve as the amplifier. Then the stone rich in quartz could turn mechanical stress into a whisper of voltage. That whisper, stacked across time, turns into an effect you can feel. Now add the water story from the plateau's base. Seasonal flow pushes and releases pressure in buried channels. That motion is not random. It follows a rhythm that once would have been predictable enough to plan around. Supporters suggest the builders harnessed that rhythm to drive the chemical cycle. Water pulses yield vibration. Vibration climbs the gallery. Gas in the system meets resonance and becomes a bridge for field amplification. Granite, heavy and crystalline, responds to that stress with a measurable charge. The loop closes with no wires in sight. There's a human part that won't let go. A researcher enters the Queen's chamber for the first time and coughs at a faint sting that sits too low to taste and too strong to ignore. He steadies a hand on the wall and waits for it to pass. He writes the moment down later with small words. Another visitor describes a dryness at the back of the throat that fades as soon as fresh air hits. These notes prove nothing, but they put bodies in the room noticing. That has value. Mystery without a witness floats. Mystery with a witness takes weight. The lab reaction winds down. Bubbles thin. The balloon stops growing and drifts against the stone. The dish now holds a different liquid, the zinc scarred. The chemist tilts it and watches the surface catch the light. Each step is traceable, each outcome modest and testable. The idea asks you to scale that trace, set it into tailored geometry, and couple it to frequencies that the upper chambers support. Then ask what the granite does with that combined push, chemical, acoustic, mechanical, pressing on quartz-rich blocks fitted to tolerances that feel almost unreasonable. A model like this carries risk. If wrong, it's a map drawn on fog. If partly right, it reframes orthodox puzzles. Why shafts that rise and then stop? Why a chamber shaped like a pressure guide rather than a ritual hall? Why residues in patterns that don't match smoke or sandal? Skeptics are right to push on missing artifacts and logistics. Supporters are right to point at places where the architecture reads like design language for flow. The debate is not noise, it's a sign that the evidence still has room to speak. Back in the lab, someone flicks the lights off and on. The balloon jerks and settles. A tiny crackle dances along its surface, a dry whisper you'd miss if the room weren't so quiet. That's not proof of ancient power. It is, however, a reminder that gas, pressure and static are easy neighbours. Move them into a space that hums at known frequencies, and add stone that converts squeeze into charge. The ingredients sit on the table. Scale and precision are the missing chapters. You can walk this path without claiming a miracle. Hydrogen wants to climb. Tones want to stack. Quartz wants to spark when pressed. Put them in sequence and the story lands with simple grace. The Queen's Chamber serves as the starter phase, feeding a tuned throat that lifts energy toward a granite heart. A machine without gears, a process without flame. If chemical fire once filled these rooms, then the granite above must have felt it, and perhaps answered, not with roar or light, but with a quiet pulse that still waits in the stone. Your breath fogs in the cool of the King's Chamber, a thin cloud that drifts toward granite dark as wet slate. Flashlight beams skim the walls and the surface throws back a muted sheen, like oil resting on water. The stone is tight-grained and heavy under the touch, flecks of pale crystal locked inside like stars frozen mid-spark. Above you, tons upon tons of mass press down through the pyramid's body. It feels like standing under a held note, the kind of pressure you don't hear so much as carry in your ribs. You rest a palm against the block, it's cold enough to sting. A soft click breaks the hush. A visiting geophysicist from Kyoto kneels by a small case, hands moving with practiced calm. He slides a quartz disc between two steel plates, clamps it, and wires a pocket voltmeter with thin leads that curl like ink strokes. He nods once, then tightens the plates a fraction. The needle twitches. No drama, no spark, just a clean, simple jump. Pressure in, charge out. He doesn't lecture. He presses the plates again and tilts his head, inviting you to watch the repeat, cause and effect tucked into the quiet. Your light climbs the chamber's seams and catches the speckled makeup of the granite. The blocks come from Aswan, far to the south, carved from rock rich in quartz, feldspar and mica. Those minerals respond to stress. Push on them, vibrate them, and they give a measurable electrical signal. The rest of this pyramid leans on limestone, softer, different in character, more like a casing or shell. But here, in this small box near the heart, the builder set an array of crystalline stone where weight and vibration converge. You angle your beam upward and the ceiling sits low, flat and deliberate. Then your eye follows the tight shaft above it, layered space stacked like a hidden attic. There are 5 small rooms up there, the so-called relieving chambers, each with granite beams laid one way, then the next, with corbelled caps stepping inward. Officially, they spread the load. But look at their rhythm. The beams alternate and frame a repeating pattern of compression. With each tremor from below, no matter how faint, the stress would cycle through the granite matrix in pulses, as if the ceiling itself were breathing in slow mechanical time. Supporters suggest those rooms act less like shields and more like tuning plates. The rough-cut tops of the beams choke air and chew vibration. The flat faces conduct it. Pressure rises and falls across crystal-rich blocks, and tiny charges appear and fade in a cadence set by whatever stirs under the bedrock. Others dismiss this as a side effect, the kind of physics you get for free when you stack heavy stone. The argument feels clinical until you feel the weight above you. The load is not random, it's arranged. You can see echoes of this in tools we use now. Small satellite units harvest micropower from onboard shake, turning vibration into a trickle of voltage that keeps sensors alive for years. deep space probes squeeze energy from mechanical stress through piezo elements when sunlight fails. The conversion is modest but steady, and the geometry matters. A plate too thick deadens the signal, a plate too thin snaps. The king's chamber holds a volume that reads like a tuned cavity built around a granite core, a scale version of that modern logic translated into stone. You lean a shoulder into a block and feel the chill travel through cloth. Hair at your forearm lifts as if brushed by a faint charge, that odd papery cling you get near a static field. Some visitors mention a thin scent like a storm's first breath, a whisper of ozone. It's subtle, not a blast, more a memory at the edge of smell. In this stale air, every hint stands out. Dust sits on the floor in fine layers, yet it has a way of clinging to cuffs and hair with needled insistence. The wall grips it. Your jacket picks up the rest. Down in a basement lab far from Cairo, a team builds a reduced replica of this chamber. Proportion scaled down, granite plates cut to match ratios, and a small driver hidden in the stand sends controlled sound waves through the box. They attach electrodes to the stone and record. The numbers are not headline large, but the pattern repeats. When the source runs at certain low tones, the voltmeter sees a regular response. Little pulses that rise above noise, shift the geometry, and the pattern stumbles. Restore the angles, and it returns. The room, even at hand scale, answers vibration with electricity. Critics counter that any stone with quartz will do this if you push hard enough, and they're right to a point. But engineers studying the chamber note a string of choices that read like precision rather than accident. Block sizes are consistent across rows. Faces inside align with tight tolerances. The orientation of crystal-rich surfaces remains stable, repeating from block to block. That kind of repetition doesn't appear in rough, rushed work. It looks like material science by habit, if not by name. Folks who knew what the stone would do, even if they called it by a different word. Move back slowly and let the scene stack. Beneath you, galleries and passages act as waveguides. Above you, those 5 lofted rooms shape the stress pattern. At your side, this granite chamber with its measured proportions and tight joints sits at the end of that path like a receiver. If vibration climbs into this box, the crystals in the walls would feel it. They would answer. A little voltage here and there, tiny streams at the edges of sense, but neat enough to matter when tied into a bigger loop. Notice the way the granite holds the touch of time. Nicks, tool traces faint as breath. Polished faces worn slick where travellers leaned. Geological memory is too neat a phrase, but you sense it anyway. Stone keeps score. Every push it ever held, every tremor it ever drank left something behind in its long crystalline lattice. That's not mystic talk. That's structure. If the pyramid's hidden passages once carried a steady rhythm, this box would have been the diary that recorded it. Page after page pressed into place by weight and wave. A tape strip across your sleeve makes a small crackle as your hand slides along the joint. It's barely there, a dry tick you could ignore. But your breath slows in response, the way it does when a room answers. The skin on your fingertips pricks. For a second, the wall feels less like a wall and more like a skin in winter. Cold, tight, alive with the faintest band of charge. You pull back. The sensation loosens and the chamber returns to being just a box of stone. The Kyoto geophysicist loosens the quartz clamp and stows the plates with care. He takes in the space the way a musician watches a silent instrument. His case snaps shut. There's no grand statement, only the shared awareness that the physics in his hands is the same type of physics this room likely knew. The scale is different, the material's older, the design more austere, but the principle lines up. Stress becomes signal within a shape that prefers it. It's easy to forget how often piezoelectric harvesters keep modern systems alive. Remote sensors under a bridge take the rumble of traffic and turn it into energy enough to send a health report. Tiny transducers in medical devices watch tissue move and convert that motion into usable data, powered by the very pressure they are measuring. We treat these as neat tricks. The pyramid builders might have treated them as central habits. The chamber's ratios say it. The layered roofs above it say it. The choice of stone says it again. You rest on the granite lid of the sarcophagus, if that's what it is, and feel its slow, cold pull warmth from your palms. The lid's edges are beveled with an accuracy that makes carpenters quiet. It has mass. It settles the air in your lungs. The floor registers your weight, and for a moment you wonder if weight was the point. The predictable press of rock on rock, set to distribute force in a pattern that never changed. A slow metronome of pressure over centuries that kept the crystals busy and the charge dripping. Some whisper that the 5 rooms above were tuned with roughness on purpose. The top faces left unpolished to seed complex modes, the underside polished to carry clean compression into the chamber's body. That's guesswork. But it fits the kind of choices you're seeing. A system like this wants rough where it shapes energy and smooth where it conducts it. It wants uniform crystals aligned across seams. It wants those seams tight. It wants mass above that breathes, not collapses. A ceiling that takes the push of the pyramid and yields by a hair, then pushes back. Travellers from another century wrote about dizziness here, about a taste of metal on the tongue, as if the air had been charged. Those are subjective notes, easily coloured by awe. Still, you think about the dry crackle when your sleeve brushed the joint, and the way the dust clung to hair, and you place those accounts next to your small modern sensations. Anecdote isn't proof, it's a compass. Sometimes it points toward a place where instruments might listen, which returns you to the model in that basement. When the driver runs at low frequency, the voltmeter makes a staircase of tiny rises. They're not smooth, they come in steps. The team adjusts the plate thickness and the steps sharpen. They tilt the assembly a few degrees off level and the response loses clarity. Restore the level and the steps return. It's not magic, it's sensitivity to geometry. Proportions matter when you want steady output from shaky input. Not far from the chamber, a guide's voice drifts in and then fades. He speaks of kings and spirits and the work of many hands. That story holds weight of its own. A tomb can be a power place for reasons beyond physics. But you trace your fingers over the crystal freckles in the block, and the engineering story keeps asking to be heard. This room doesn't feel like a place made to rest. It feels like a place made to work quietly without witnesses. Others dismiss this whole line as clever retrofitting of modern ideas onto ancient walls. Fair enough. The past doesn't owe us our favourite myths. Yet when engineers walk through here, they whisper about block orientation and crystal ratios. They point to repeated sizes and layered roofs. They see the consistency of choices that increase signal and reduce loss. It's one thing to trip into usable effects. It's another to align a dozen of them in series. Your hand returns to the wall. Static kisses skin and fades into your knuckles. In the beam's edge, mica flakes wink and go dark. The chamber waits. Whatever moved in these stones, if anything did, left no cables to trace, no plates to pry loose, no switch to flip. It left only materials that answer pressure and a shape that favours rhythm. If there was once a pulse running through the pyramid's bones, this room would have been where rock learned to speak its faint electrical language. You take a last look up into the shaft of stacked rooms and then lower the light to the joint at eye level. The air is cool and spare. A tiny curl of dust lifts, turns and sticks to your sleeve, as if drawn by a hidden thread. The image holds for a quiet beat. The stone half alive with a residual whisper. The charge too small to show but large enough to feel. And then it loosens. Out beyond these walls, a different kind of sensor maps the dark, counting particles that fall from space and thread straight through the earth. If the chamber is a receiver, those instruments are the eyes that see the circuit it sits inside. Air recirculates with a faint chemical tang underground, cool on your cheeks despite the desert heat above. In the dim room, rows of black sensors blink a slow rhythm, while the only sound is the soft fan from a rack of machines. Screens glow pale blue. Across them, thin white tracks crawl from top to bottom in steady rain, as if a snowstorm were falling through stone. A technician tightens his headphones with 2 fingers and leans closer, not breathing for a beat. On his screen, the blizzard thins and then parts, leaving the outline of a shape no flashlight could find. Muon trails look like scratches on old film. They drift and stutter, then stack into patterns where density changes. The team calls it subatomic X-ray vision, because muons come from the upper atmosphere and pass through almost everything on their way to the ground. Detectors count how many survive. Fewer counts mean thicker rock. More counts mark open space. It's simple in principle and stubborn in practice. Hours flow by. Coffee cools. But when the counts form a clean boundary, it feels like someone slid a door open inside the Earth. Back in 2017, a group using this method reported a cavity high above the Grand Gallery. About 98 feet long, they said. It sat where no burial plan would put a room, and where no builder would waste labour just to lighten weight. That find earned a name in headlines, Big Void, and a footnote in debates. The argument hasn't ended. Some call it a relieving space, others a construction ramp left in place. Even the cautious agreed on one point. It shouldn't be there if the monument is only a tomb. Years passed. The detectors grew more sensitive. In 2023 and 2024, a broader study layered muon counts with gravimetric readings, minute changes in local gravity that hint at density shifts, and ground-penetrating radar where the sand and permissions allowed. One dataset is an outline. 3 together begin to feel like depth. The overlap drew shapes under the plateau that didn't smear with noise when the angle changed. Lines held, corners held. The geometry didn't care who watched. On the composite map, thin corridors extend away from the pyramid like vertebrae, long and straight with joints that meet at right angles. Natural fissures don't prefer 90 degrees. Burial passages in other sites bend, narrow, meander. These did not. A field geophysicist ran a hand down the side of the monitor, as if tracing the line in dust, then pulled back and scribbled a note you couldn't read from the far side of the room. The air compressor kicked on and made everyone jump. Not all the lines made it into public view. Internal notes, passed like guilty secrets, described a portion of the array flagged for further verification. Another memo listed file names that later loaded as blanks in the shared repository. Supporters suggest the omissions reflect caution, not conspiracy. Critics counter that caution usually annotates, not erases. The record shows sections delayed, footnotes lengthened, and one summary draft quietly replaced by a version with fewer depths and softer edges. A junior analyst who doesn't want a name attached described a phrase she heard in the lab. Honeycomb of a resonance chamber. She said it came from a physicist after a late-night run stitched a dozen partial views together. By morning, the phrase was gone, and the speaker's later notes treated the same pattern as natural cavities, overlapping by chance. Some whisper that nobody asked him to change his mind about the physics, only about the words. Leave the office for a moment and follow the data into a virtual run. The fly-through begins at ground level on the plateau, then angles down along a transparent plane that slices the pyramid like a cake. Cavities bloom in pale light. The big void reappears, familiar now. Beneath it, thin lanes reach outward, then down like a circuit traced in slow motion. At each intersection, a room-shaped pocket glows a little brighter, as if it were waiting for something to flow through. The path tracks upward and aligns with known rooms. Then it drops again and vanishes into a depth the model marks but won't name. Those who push back say fissures love to align with stress fields. They say gravity data can drift. Radar bounces lie when clay turns to gravel. That's fair. Random systems can pretend to be neat when you take a small enough slice. Yet the probability analysis presented in one internal deck leaned in the other direction. When they rotated the angle of the detectors and still got the same straight segments, when they shifted baselines and the joints remained within narrow tolerance bands, The odds tilted toward intent rather than accident. The pattern held even when they subtracted any one method. On a long table in a side office, a stack of consent forms sits next to a bag of dates and a chipped mug. A project coordinator, hair tied back with a rubber band, pencil tucked behind one ear, scrolls through emails. Some urge release now, arguing that open data builds trust. Others caution that every void invites a wild story, and that tourism doesn't need new complications. It's not villainy. Careers, budgets, and international permits all hang by small threads. The coordinator sighs, deletes one reply, writes another, and leaves the pencil mark visible on the desk. Outside this room, the night in Cairo has its own slow circuit. A bakery oven cools, taxis idle at light, a cat slips between parked scooters. In a cramped apartment, a grad student skims archived forum posts and screen caps every map before the links can change. He pauses at a frame where corridors appear to step in a repeating pattern, each a little offset from the last. He draws over it with a fingertip on the touchpad, then shakes his hand as if the air were too dry. Sleep can wait. In the sterile chamber, the live feed purrs on. Muon tracks fall with no interest in human timing. A clear patch opens again, 2 degrees off the prior. The technician presses his lips together and clicks save. He knows the argument about natural processes. He knows sandstones can fracture into grids. He also knows how rarely those grids align to the axis of a structure above with this kind of precision. His finger hovers over a button that pushes the frame to the shared server. He pushes it anyway, then watches the progress bar with steady eyes. The conversation now folds back to the pyramid. Remember how earlier studies focused high in the body of the monument? The new overlays nod to that, then lower the viewpoint until the map throws a shadow into the bedrock. There the corridors gain length. The joints grow more regular. One branch takes a gentle bend and then splits into 2, like a fork in a river engineered with a draftsman's square. No burial culture at Giza. According to standard plans, carved rooms like this underground for ritual alone. If these are natural, they are the most disciplined accidents in the plateau's history. Add one more piece. Gravimetric readings collected by careful footwork across a checkerboard of points show tiny dips not only within the pyramid's footprint, but radiating outward along paths that echo the muon map. The dips repeat at intervals like beats. Supporters suggest this rhythm points to engineered spacing. Others dismiss the alignment as the human eye chasing patterns, where soil density changes for mundane reasons. The truth perhaps sits between natural layers shaped by water flow, later harnessed or guided by an unknown plan. The debate isn't only technical, it's also about stakes. A museum official voices a quiet worry that new chambers could mean new cracks, new tourist pressure, new conservation headaches. A field tech whispers that withholding coordinates keeps looters away. And then there's the older fear that a brave claim becomes a headline that never dies, outliving corrections. The pyramid has carried worse. Run the simulation again, slower. The camera drifts down a primary line, pauses at an intersection, then follows a side tunnel whose angle matches a known shaft above within a hand's width over hundreds of meters. If that match persists beyond software artifacts, it reads like alignment across worlds, the visible and the buried. The map overlays a faint grid on the sand at the surface. A few dots land outside the monument's outline, headed toward fields modern maps call Hawara's Reach. Here the old accounts stir. Ancient writers spoke of a labyrinth in that basin. They listed counts of courts and rooms, half above ground and half below, numbers so large they read as law rather than survey. Modern scans, according to the notes we've seen, have returned rectilinear patterns there too, rows, halls and crossways. A separate company using satellite and seismic approaches described layers at 40, 60, 80, 100 meters and deeper. They reported that the deeper levels looked dry, sealed off from groundwater and hollow. Groundwater is a real threat now. The water table rose after the Aswan Dam reshaped the Nile's pulse, and salty seepage slowly chews at old stone. At Hawara, reports say the top layers sit within this brine. Below that, bedrock starts around 18 metres, and beneath it, the scans trace halls of serious size, 80 metres long, 50 wide, linked by wide corridors at set depths. If even a portion of those shapes holds, the design isn't random clutter, it's a layout. Not all those teams kept the microphone. One expedition reported being told to pause communications, another saw its files walled off from international release. Explanations range from national security to site protection, to the slow grind of academic caution. People inside the system speak in low tones about being careful with claims, careful with access, careful with hope. Secrets do not stay buried forever. They do, however, leave fingerprints on the paper trail. If the muon maps under Giza are the first act, then the hints under Hawara feel like a second movement in the same piece. The corridors at Giza run vertical, like the stems of a machine. The halls at Hawara spread horizontal like a floor plan for storage or control. Supporters suggest the two together outline a function larger than memorial. Critics counter that the planet loves to trick pattern-hungry eyes. The pattern tilts in the light and its meaning sharpens. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the basin at dawn. The air smells faintly of wet clay and diesel. A radar sled skims over crusted mud, tethered by a cable that makes a soft hiss against sand. The screen on the sled's handle fills with bars and brakes, not elegant to laymen but familiar to the crew. One operator taps a segment and raises an eyebrow. Another nods and marks a coordinate. Their faces stay level. Faces learn to stay level. Back at the underground lab, someone zooms the Giza model out until the plateau turns small and the corridors look like threads. A few thread ends angle toward empty space on the map, then past the frame, and the eye does what it always does, it connects dots. A cautious voice in the room says it's only a render artifact. Another suggests scheduling a baseline run farther out. No one says the word labyrinth. It's late. The screens dim on their own timer. The air unit rattles, then settles. Outside, the desert drops a degree. The machines inside do not sleep. The muons fall, whether watched or not, a soft drizzle of the cosmos sketching whatever lies below. If those sketches trace a network that links a pyramid to a labyrinth, then the next question is not only what the map shows, but what the network was meant to do when it was whole. Dawn warms the Fayum Basin in a soft, slow rise. The air smells faintly of damp clay and diesel as two technicians tug ground-penetrating radar sleds over hardpan terraces. Rubber glides rasp against grit. A laptop strapped to one chest shows lines that start to gather into boxes and corridors. 20 meters down, the screen fills with neat rectangles that do not belong to dunes or roots. A dragonfly hovers, darting away each time the sled bumps a shallow ridge. On the other side, a third tech braces a clipboard with his knee and notes coordinates in tight pencil strokes that dig into the paper. The small field tent rattles in a breeze, and inside a portable monitor glows. Yesterday's test grid looked messy, edges broken by noise. This morning, after a cooler night and a steadier pace, the returns sharpen into right angles that repeat. Horizontal spans cross vertical lanes the way streets meet at a downtown corner. One of the techs removes a glove and rubs grit between thumb and forefinger, as if texture might explain numbers. It doesn't. The screen shows long halls and nodes beneath silt, spaced as if someone once counted steps with a string and a chalk line. The written record reaches across time like a cautious hand. Fragments of papyrus preserve Herodotus, who spoke of a labyrinth with 12 courts and 3,000 chambers, half below ground. Diodorus added that the passages wound so intricately no visitor could find a path alone, while Strabo described a great palace with courtyards and hidden spaces. Those words sat for centuries as lore, their scale too grand for what the surface shows now. Others dismiss the old accounts as travellers' flourishes, exaggeration in a world that loved spectacle. Yet here the geometry pressed into the monitor begins to rhyme with their counts and rhythms. The sled pauses. The operator slides the antenna head along a new line, closer to the berm. The return brightens along a strip and then opens, a long run that keeps a steady width for tens of meters. A soft whistle leaves someone's mouth. Rows, halls, crossways, each a simple word for a line that does not wander. They match the stretch that classical writers place south of the Pyramid of Amenemhat III. The whisper rises without anyone planning it. It's not legend, it's blueprint. It lands quietly, then hangs in the tent like breath on glass. Walk the site in your mind as a pair. Giza's cavities stack like components inside a vertical engine, compressing and channeling stress along a central axis. Hawara spreads wide, chambers knitted like a grid laid over the bedrock. One rises, one runs. Together, they feel less like twins and more like a team. Supporters suggest this horizontal spread could handle regulation rather than generation. Buffering, switching, storing. Critics counter that pattern-seeking minds lay circuits over any convincing map. The two sites, though, keep offering complementary shapes. A shaft and a sheet, a throat and a lung. A crate of resistivity cables waits in the shade. The coils smell faintly of warm rubber. Later in the day, electrodes will sink into damp soil at regular intervals, and a current will pass. Lower resistance hints at voids or saturated zones. Higher readings mark dense stone. Leaked resistivity images, decades of whisper and email forward chains, have shown a grid of low-density lanes bleeding under nearby farmland. Since 2010, access has narrowed with a familiar explanation list: groundwater, site protection, budget cycles. The pattern feels known: discovery, denial, delay. Some shrug and call it prudent management. Others see gates closing whenever geometry starts to look too neat. On a fold-out table, a compact magnetometer ticks every few seconds. A field technician shades the display with his palm and frowns. A faint, regular pulse rises above noise. It's too patterned for random drift, and too weak to be the hum of modern lines out near the road. He grins and calls it the desert sighing, every few minutes like a sleeper changing position. He writes the intervals on tape stuck to the unit's handle. 4 minutes, 4 again, then 3.5. What breathes under silt at that pace remains a question, but the cadence etches itself into the morning. Some whisper that if the Great Pyramid did harvest resonance, then Hawara may have held the next stage, processing and storage. In a modern lab, you'd call it a capacitor, a device that takes in pulses and levels them, then feeds steady supply to where it's needed. Stone can hold charge along thin boundaries, especially where moisture plays between mineral grains. The labyrinth's long runs and wide nodes could, in this speculative frame, provide surfaces for fields to pool and settle. Others dismiss it as romantic electrics laid over a ruin. The present fact is simpler. A rectilinear structure of impressive size sits below silt, and its plan favours function over show. The ground crew moves toward the old dig trench where Flinders Petrie once worked. Notes from 1889 describe a scatter of stone chips so vast he believed they were the stripped bones of a complex that could have hosted all Egypt's great temples. He also found sloping roof beams of quartzite or granite, massive members, and most striking, a single-piece quartzite box weighing around 110 tons. Those details align with ancient claims of roofs made from single stones and columns marked by inscriptions. Today, the trench edge wears a colonnade of grasses. A beetle crawls out, tracks a circle, then goes back into shade. Inside the tent, a printout of Strabo sits under a water bottle. Courtyards, hidden chambers, great scale. Diodorus's warning about losing your way without a guide runs along the margin in pencil. These lines, written long before satellites and radar, read like someone mapping complexity with words. The monitor's grid offers a new lexicon of measurement. Side by side, the old phrases and the new traces don't clash. They lean into each other across time. One of the techs takes a break outside. The sun is higher now, heat rising off the basin. A pump thumps in a distant field, lifting water to a low canal. That background beat mingles with a slower meter on the magnetometer inside. Rising groundwater has been the public reason to keep heavy equipment away from parts of the site. The concern is real. Water gnaws at masonry and mud brick without pity. But it also serves as a ready gate. When excavations could settle disputes, the gates rarely swing open. Supporters suggest the resistivity maps extend beyond any single monument footprint. Lines bend out under farmland, forming a web that ties to the placement of surface features. Critics counter that agriculture and irrigation grids can print themselves into subsurface readings. Survey teams account for that by changing frequency, swapping array geometries, and repeating readings at different moisture levels. The ghost grid holds shape even when the field pumps rest. Back at the laptop, the newest raster pass tightens a corridor's edge. It runs under what would have been an outer court if Herodotus's count holds. The 12 courts he described are absent on the surface now, but their outlines may linger at depth. The tech logs the depth, 8 to 12 meters. The earlier raster hinted at deeper tiers. A private note references reports of returns at 40, 60, 80 and more, levels that could sit below the reach of modern water and therefore survive in better condition. If true, the scale expands from impressive to intricate. A field notebook opens to an odd entry. A small object, long and smooth, appeared in one band of returns, about 40 meters below. The person who drew it called it a tic-tac, a simple shape marker, not a conclusion. Others have tied that hint to private scans and grand claims. Here, it stays on paper, a sketch with a question mark. If a narrow, elongated body sits in a wide corridor, the why matters more than the label. It could be a collapsed roof leaf, it could be a capsule, it could be a trick of reflection. In patient work, a may stays a may. If the labyrinth functioned as a stone capacitor, what would flow through it? A grid needs input. The Giza engine in this theory fed pulses of mechanical and electrical energy drawn from water and resonance. Hawara may have steadied those pulses, stored them, and bled them out in measured rhythm along paths we no longer trace. The concept sounds grand until you hold it next to humbler parallels. Clay jars with copper and iron that some call batteries, dry stone vaults that echo at specific tones, quartzite blocks polished to a mirror sheen, like Petrie noted, making surfaces that could hold charge with minimal leak. The tech with the magnetometer hears the soft tick shift early by a few seconds. He bumps the table, then apologizes to the instrument as if he woke a friend. He logs the new spacing. A line of ants trails by the cooler, mapping their own precise grid, turning as a single mind around pebbles and straw. The small order mirrors the large. Pattern begets pattern at every scale you care to watch. When the team compares Hawara and Giza on one sheet, the pairings sharpen. Surface monuments above, ordered underground spaces below. Two voices in the same chord. One site draws a vertical breath through stone. The other spreads that breath sideways and keeps it for later. That reading fits the machine network hypothesis, like a hand fits its glove. It also invites suspicion. Minds love symmetry, and ancient engineers could have loved it too. The tension between desire and data steadies the hand on the next antenna pass. Requests for deeper checks join the stack. Permissions wait in offices far from the basin. Since the last high-profile survey, the site has tightened further. A lock turned another quarter turn. At the edge of town, a retired caretaker keeps stories of tours where visitors traced quartzite edges with their fingertips and found the stone cold and smooth like river ice in shade. His voice drops when he recalls officials boxing up new prints with no date for release. He shrugs. He has seen many seasons of requests and refusals. Strabos, roofs of single stones, Diodorus's notes on disorientation, Herodotus's 3,000 chambers. These echoes mix with Petrie's heavy roof beams in that single-piece quartzite box. Put them beside today's grids, and the picture gains weight. The radar cannot tell you what ink once covered columns. It can tell you where those columns likely stood. The resistivity cannot read an inscription. It can show you where an atrium might widen. As the sun tips west, the light flattens. Shadows stretch across the terrace and cut dark bars over the sleds. The magnetometer still ticks low and steady. The laptop fans murmur. A blackbird lands on the tent rope, feels the tension, then lifts again. In the near distance, the pyramid of Amenemhat III holds its profile, weathered and reliable. Under its southern face, an entrance once led down. Petrie placed it on the western edge of that face. The memory of that angle and offset still helps align the day's scans. If Giza and Hawara now hum in harmony across one landscape, one rising, one smoothing, then the frame widens. Perhaps the design extends beyond a single river valley. Some whisper that patterns like this may appear where monuments meet water and stone in careful ratios, each site an instrument tuned to its place. Others dismiss the idea as a net cast too wide. The desert cools a degree, enough for breath to show for a moment as you exhale. The team coils cables by feel. The tent's zipper rasps closed, then opens again for one last glance at the monitor. The grid glows in pale green squares, orderly and quiet. A note goes into the log. Schedule another pass at dawn. Adjust antenna height by 2 centimeters. Repeat the transect across the deeper anomaly. If the pattern holds, it might be the second voice we need to hear the chord. And if 2 voices are singing in the sand, we'll have to listen for others answering from farther away. Night cools the desert and the view lifts. The pyramid shrinks under you until it looks like a careful glyph pressed into sand. The Nile thins to a ribbon, then a thread, and the continent tilts away. City lights soften to a dim lattice. From this height, shapes you know by memory begin to rhyme with shapes half a world away. Straight lines break the curves of valleys. Angles repeat in stubborn ways. The map hums with quiet geometry you don't notice at street level, but here it feels like a chord held under the noise. Your eyes drift west. A basin of dark land and scattered lights gives way to a high plateau. The layout at Teotihuacan comes into view like an old plan traced by a steady hand. Laser scans chart the Avenue of the Dead running 15 degrees east of true north. That same tilt shows up at Giza, a shared lean that invites a double take. The Pyramid of the Sun carries height to base ratios that mirror Khufu's proportions, not as a perfect copy, but close enough to feel deliberate. No caravans cross that ocean to swap blueprints, yet the numbers talk to each other as if they remember the same rule. A field notebook opens on a table far below. A researcher taps 2 columns of figures and shakes her head. Ocean between them, millennia between them. No letters, no shared calendars, no trade of engineers. Still, the math stacks in pairs and repeats. It's one thing to say lines and slopes might match by chance. It's another to watch proportional relationships recur in monuments that defined their cultures, anchored their cities, and took generations to raise. Her pencil draws a soft arc in the margin, then stops before it makes a circle. Let the frame widen. North of the Yellow River Plain, earthen mounds near Xi'an cluster in rings and squares. From the ground, they look like hills smoothed by time. From above, their spacing falls into ratios that echo harmonic sets, simple number families you also see in music. Several mounds cradle void-like centres, not caves in the wild sense, but cores left purposefully empty, as if the hollows themselves held meaning. Cross the Pacific again, and the dry coast of Peru slides into view. In the Lambayeque valleys, Sican pyramids sit over aquifer knots like stones, set where groundwater swells. Farmers there still watch how wells rise and fall, in rhythms older than the roads. Back in the lab, a different kind of map glows in low light. A researcher overlays global models of high electromagnetic activity with long path alignments often called ley patterns. The dots that mark intense natural fields brighten at 3 old sites: Giza, Teotihuacan, Xi'an. The match is not a fingerprint, but it's a nudge. Some whisper these monuments were sited to tap into the planet's own currents, in the way a windmill is placed where air moves. Others dismiss the overlay as a game of connect the dots, because hotspots are wide and lines can be drawn through anything if your ruler is long enough. Tesla's unfinished tower rises for a moment in memory. Wardenclyffe paired an above-ground structure with a buried dome and rods sunk into wet ground. A cap and a root, a mirror of the above-below symmetry you see in many pyramid complexes. His work aimed at wireless transmission and tuned resonance, with the earth and air as part of the circuit. The formal design sits a century away from these ancient stones, but the rhyme is hard to miss: a shaped crown, a conductive base, and a medium ready to carry a wave. If you want the cooler take, historians point to convergent design. Human builders meet the same constraints: wind, soil, gravity, weather, sun. A stable base and tapered mass keep a monument standing. Water nearby feeds cities. A line toward cardinal directions is easy to set with a stick and shadow. Different cultures can arrive at similar solutions with no contact and no hidden ledger of shared rules. Critics counter that repeating angles and proportions still deserve a closer look when they cluster in high-cost projects that shaped entire landscapes. Now a quiet page turn. Side-by-side cross-sections slide into view. Khufu's familiar slope, Teotihuacan's broad steps, an earthen Xi'an mound with layers like a cake. The outlines glow with ratios that keep returning. Simple fractions, golden cuts, repeating triangles. Not every measure is exact, not every match is clean. But enough overlap appears to make the heart slow and the breath deepen. Supporters suggest these shapes nod to an old understanding that structures behave like instruments, and that certain proportions favour resonance, whether in air, stone or ground. The pattern extends below. Where scans exist, we see cavities paired with mass, shafts paired with chambers, voids paired with load. In Peru, channels run under platforms. In Egypt, a network of gaps and passages collects beneath a limestone skin. In China, sealed corridors trace paths no one has walked in centuries. Tie them to water, and another layer of design peeks through. Sites with known aquifers often thread their largest monuments along the flow, as if the builders listened to the ground before they pressed the first block into the dirt. A narrow office lamp shades the next thought. If these are not isolated marvels, they might be verses in a larger composition. Some whisper that the ratios weren't just aesthetic. They might have been a way to tune large masses to the background beat of the Earth. The term planetary resonance sounds grand, but it could be as plain as selecting lengths and volumes that prefer specific frequencies produced by wind, water, or the slow flex of crust. Others dismiss the idea as poetic engineering, the kind of romance that arises when numbers happen to align. Still, the paradox sits there. Monumental precision in different places, matching tilts, shared ratios, correspondence with underground flow and magnetic intensity. The mind reaches for a frame where the world feels less scattered. A geographer runs a finger along a map edge. He pauses at each site and presses lightly, as if he could feel a tone through the paper. He can't. But he knows that music is made when separate notes sound together. His hand rests on the table a moment longer than needed. Tesla's name returns, not as a hero card, but as a parallel line. Wardenclyffe's buried veins next to its crown, reaching for a world-coupled transmission. The memory of his work underlines a simple point. Energy systems often require pairs, above and below, conductor and insulator, mass and void. The old monuments show those pairs in stone. Their designers invested labour into emptiness as if emptiness did the work. That choice tips the conversation from art toward function, even if the function hums at a pitch too low for us to hear now. Grounded caution has its place. Many alignments fall apart when you change how you measure. Some ratios appear only after a creative round of rounding. Not every mound near Xi'an forms a pure harmonic set, and not every Sican platform sits over the strongest water source. When the dust of debate settles, what remains are a handful of strong links and a field of grey. That grey deserves patience, not a rush to claim a grand global blueprint. But a gentler possibility lingers. Knowledge can surface, disperse, and return across ages without a single unbroken chain. People in one valley learn how to make shapes sing. The idea sleeps, then wakes elsewhere with new notes. The monuments become long messages written in ratios and stone, sent without a promise that anyone will ever read them. They wait in deserts and forests and farms, and time does what time does. If these scattered sites form a loose choir, then the question shifts. What did the whole sing when it was alive? Supporters suggest the answer might be practical as well as spiritual. Fields steadied, waters balanced, minds calmed by steady waves that matched body rhythms. Critics counter that the language slips too fast from math to hope. The debate continues in classrooms and at dig sites, in quiet panels of numbers, in long walks around old foundations. We hang a little longer in that orbital view. Lines thread through continents like faint stitches. Ratios repeat like a low refrain. A tower with a buried dome stands in the mind beside a pyramid over a deep void, and neither seems quite alone anymore. If the world once held an instrument built from earth and stone, its score has mostly blown away. But a few bars remain. And from those, we can try to hear how the rest might have sounded, which leads us to the next task. How a grid becomes a generator, and what switches it would need to play. Dust floats in the lamplight like slow snow. The Cairo workshop is cool, its fan turning with a tired click. You stand beside a scarred bench where a retired electrician leans over wood, darkened by years of oil and sweat. He drags a fingertip through the dust and draws little boxes, arrows and nodes. Shafts become lines. Chambers become symbols. He mutters almost to himself, "If you connect the dots, you get a circuit." Around him, taped sketches of the pyramid's passages wear penciled markings. Capacitor here, diode there, coil where the gallery rises. His private language etched over ancient geometry. He points the stub of a pencil at the base stones. In his model, the story begins below ground. Water moves under pressure through the plateau's hidden channels. As flow squeezes through tight layers, the stone vibrates. Limestone isn't just a shell here, it's a body that carries that pressure as a low mechanical pulse. He taps the bench twice. That beat, he says, is the input, the push that starts the whole chain, like a pump that never truly stops while the aquifer breathes with the seasons. Follow the path upward and the lines stack neatly. The casing and core stones act like coupled plates. The pulse rises until it meets the Grand Gallery's steep throat. He has sketched its steps as comb teeth. In his scheme, each step is a coupler, catching certain frequencies and passing them forward. The gallery narrows, and the air inside forms a column tuned by angle and overlap. The electrician calls it a waveguide, a channel that doesn't just carry sound, but shapes it, the way a flute directs a note. Energy climbs as resonance strengthens, not with sparks, but with stubborn low tones that wrap around the stone. He flips to another sheet and traces the narrow shafts leading from the chamber below. He argues they weren't vents for breath, but conduits for gas. Supporters suggest a controlled reaction once ran there. Two common materials meeting on stone to release hydrogen. As the gas rose, it entered the resonant field above. Subject to vibration, hydrogen doesn't sit idle. Ionized, it becomes sensitive to electrical fields, a faint plasma in motion that turns acoustic energy into something nearer to electrodynamic behaviour. Critics counter that residue is thin and containers are absent. He shrugs. A system meant to run hot and long might leave little behind except ghost chemistry and dust. The pencil finds the king's chamber. Granite blocks interlock like careful teeth. Here the electrician slows, as if stepping into a church. He taps the page where he has drawn quartz grains as tiny batteries. The idea is simple enough. Squeeze a crystal rhythmically, it offers charge. Relieve the pressure, it relaxes. Do that again and again. The pattern accumulates as micro-voltage. He links arrows from the gallery's throat into the granite box, framing the chamber as a translation stage. Oscillation in, current out. Modest in scale per cycle, but tireless if the beat held. On the wall, an old photo of the ceiling spaces above the chamber sits under a pushpin. In his system map, those layers act like tuning plates, not just to keep weight off, but to focus how stress moves through the granite. If the pulse from below matches the chamber's natural frequencies, the squeeze and release rhythm finds order. When order arrives, outputs stabilize. Others dismiss this as a neat story chasing effects that exist by coincidence. He nods, then he draws the same diagram again with fewer arrows, like he's stripping a radio to its core until only the necessary pieces remain. A knock on the door brings a younger voice and a plastic tub. The engineering student sets down a tabletop rig built with a tank, a small speaker, thin granite tiles, and a cheap voltmeter. The bench smells faintly of solder and warm plastic. They fill the tank, set the tiles on rubber feet, and sweep a low tone through the speaker until a soft vibration is felt in the wrist where it rests on wood. The meter's needle stirs, then holds a tiny tremble. It's not much, but it is repeatable. They switch off the tone and the needle settles. No grand claim here, just a hint that translation from motion to charge can be coaxed with simple parts. Back at the sketches, the electrician rubs a smudge into a pointed cap at the top of the outline. He draws a tiny coil and a note. Discharge? The old casing once wore a fine skin. He wonders out loud if a conductive apex ever crowned the peak, perhaps copper or alloy now long gone. Limestone can carry moisture and ions. Gaps and seams could form pathways. In this reading, the pyramid itself becomes the wire. No visible strands, yet a circuit closes through material properties and geometry. He smiles at the thought of wireless work before wires were common. Critics counter that lightning rods and modern myths too easily fill that gap. He keeps the coil small and the question mark large. The room dims as a cloud slides across the sun, and the fan's click marks time. You can almost hear the ancient crew in torchlight, not as mystics, but as patient makers. Supporters suggest teams learn the pitch of a stone plate by ear, shimming and planing until a shared note swelled between blocks. In a dark corridor, a low hum might feel like a presence. A priest would bless it, an engineer would log it. Two truths living side by side in the same hall. Purpose sits on another sheet all its own. If a device like this ran, what was the point? The electrician has 3 columns with small, neat handwriting. One reads field balancing, a gentle nudge to the local geomagnetic environment. Another reads tremor damping, where resonance at certain frequencies could bleed energy from shallow quakes or microseisms. The last column notes field agriculture, linking steady low tones to plant growth cycles and water clumping behaviours. None of these require bright electric arcs. They describe tuning. Others dismiss such aims as romantic. Perhaps. But agriculture doesn't scorn rhythm, and neither does ground. He flips the page and draws arrows outward from the pyramid into the plateau. Maybe power wasn't meant to be carried as long-distance lines. Maybe it was meant to soak into stone, water, and air. A quiet field rather than a beam. He adds a dotted line toward the Fayum and writes only network. Some whisper that multiple sites could phase lock like metronomes on a shared shelf. A nudge here, a settling there, a handful of monuments keeping time together over the land. The idea is soft, almost musical, and he seems to like it for that reason alone. The student packs the tub but lingers. She asks about failure modes. He nods again. If water flow shifts, tones drift. If a casing cracks, nodes detune. The system would keep working, but poorly. The hum would turn ragged. Maintenance would mean alignment as much as repair. That would explain why perfect angles mattered and why even small blocks were cut to a rhythm of size and orientation. A machine tuned to the earth needs constant listening. It also needs the humility to retune when the environment changes around it. On a shelf sits a jar of copper nails found years ago in a market bin. He places one beside the sketch. He wonders whether any apex metal survived the centuries, traded, melted, forgotten. He circles the top stone in pencil and writes, "Unknown." It's a rare word in his workshop, and he leaves it there on purpose. Not every gap begs a story. Some gaps are invitations to test. Rain begins, small and short-lived. The air picks up the smell of dust meeting water. Lightning flickers far off, and the workshop lights dip for an instant. He glances up, then back at the drawing. He traces a last line from cloud to peak and smiles at his own boldness. Storms carry their own frequencies. Thunder rolls in bands that the stone might answer. He taps the bench once more and, softer now, repeats his line, "Connect the dots, get a circuit." A flash lifts the room like a camera bulb, and the thunder follows with a long roll that seems to lean against the city's roofs. For a heartbeat, the pyramid is somewhere out there, wearing the sky like a charged cloak. Maybe the storm was its power plant. The thought hangs in the air as the light steadies, and the deeper question turns the page toward the obstacles that keep tests locked behind gates and signatures. The keys jingle like small bells in a tiled stairwell. Cool air follows the guard down into the museum's basement, where the lights hum and then blink off one by one, leaving islands of glow between long rows of metal cabinets. He presses a palm to a door to steady the ring in his ears, then twists the last key. Inside, folders bulge with site permissions, sensor logs, and decades of scans. Paper smells faintly of dust and toner. The final click lands with a quiet weight, and the hallway sinks into a low, even hush. Upstairs, the day carried an ordinary rhythm. Students gawking at statues, a family asking for the mummy room, a curator smiling through a scripted answer about conservation protocols. Down here, routine holds a different charge. After the 2023-24 anomaly leaks, the number of excavation requests swelled. Teams drafted plans to probe the deep cavities with boreholes the width of a coin. Each application wore a new badge: heritage protection, structural risk, groundwater stability. The denials arrived in calm phrases, always the same tone, always a reminder that caution protects what time cannot replace. A laptop screen glows in a side office where the air runs a little warmer. A folder of internal emails sits open. Line after line debates rollouts and phrasing about managing public reaction. The words feel careful, almost polite. No one writes what they fear in plain terms. No panic, no exclamation marks. Just a note about tourism season, a mention of media cycles, and a margin comment that the deeper anomalies require further verification before any public statement. The cursor blinks. No one types what the blinking suggests. Not everyone hiding behind a locked drawer is a villain. The orthodoxy-dependent archaeologist grades papers at home, living on a salary tied to a stable story. He spent years insisting that function follows funerary form, and a sudden sideways turn could erase his footing. The curator who balances tours and preservation has learned that a single rumour can empty hotel blocks. One floor below, a young technician encrypts datasets at the end of her shift. She salts the archive with long passphrases, then stuffs the sticky note into a pocket and throws it away outside past the museum gate. The little scenes break into fragments when you stitch a day together. An American grad student stands at customs with a notebook full of hand-drawn overlays. He thinks field notes are safe. The officer flips through, frowns, and slides them into a tray. The student watches his own handwriting disappear without a proper receipt. In a lab across the sea, a French researcher uploads muon overlays that show clean bands where rock should be. A week later, The files sit online as blurred placeholders after a software update. No one answers her polite ticket. A different office apologises for server migration. You've seen this rhythm before. Napoleon's teams carried crates of notes out of Egypt, then locked half of it behind committee doors. During the Cold War, unmarked trucks parked near the plateau with sensors that listen to the ground. Hints of those logs linger in footnotes and rumours, not in open stacks. Some whisper that a foreign agency once ran seismic sweeps near Giza. Others dismiss that as lore inflated by boredom. The echo that matters is simple. Control the data, and you can keep the question still long enough to manage the answer. An afternoon meeting runs late in the ministry. Coffee cools in tiny cups on a tray. A curator with modest shoes and a neat stack of printouts speaks softly. If we're wrong, we disgrace our ancestors. If we're right, we rewrite human history. Either way, we lose control. The sentence lands with a flat human sting. No one records it in minutes. The room breathes once, twice, and turns to the safer subject of visitor flow projections. The pattern extends outward like scaffolding. Permissions for fresh cores request 3 signatures. Each signature requires a memo. Each memo asks for a risk matrix that invokes groundwater like a talisman. After the Aswan Dam shifted the Nile's rhythms, the water table crept, and conservation teams learned how stone drinks and then crumbles. It's not hard to say no. It is harder to say yes when the result could be an irreversible hole or a headline that runs ahead of nuance. There is a logic in the refusal. Every chamber, the old builders knew, needed seals to keep pressure where it belongs. An open valve at the wrong time bleeds a system dry. The same mechanics play out in a modern archive. Gates hold. Keys ration access. Information flows through narrow conduits, labelled and timed. Supporters suggest that this kind of gatekeeping protects fragile sites and buys time for better tools. Critics counter that it also preserves a neat story, tidy enough to sell, sterile enough to store. Small stories make the larger shape visible. A conservator takes a phone call in the stairwell where the walls sweat in August heat. She learns a planned lecture on the scan. Anomalies has been rescheduled to after the winter season. The speaker never hears the new date. A drone permit near the plateau is approved, then reversed without explanation. The paperwork says wind risk. The pilot looks at the forecast and mutters, then packs up. Outside the formal halls, private groups keep scanning from afar. Some claim proprietary methods can see 6 kilometres below the desert. They reference past successes in gold, water and old roads. Their slides show rectilinear forms and deep orthogonal bands beneath the Fayum. Supporters suggest those images align with earlier surveys that spoke of a labyrinth 8 metres down. Others dismiss those claims as marketing. The pattern, the other way, remains off the official calendar with press events that never appear. The museum guard returns for a forgotten thermos. He pauses at the basement landing and hears the building's slow breath through vents. The cabinets hold their mute order. Somewhere in those drawers sits a thin report about the chevron blocks above the Great Pyramid's entrance, where a small cavity was confirmed behind stone. It's not a secret. It is simply a piece in a set that grows heavier each year. Where does it lead? The answer shifts with the person you ask. The archaeologist hopes for a better 2 model with improved stress maps. The engineer hopes for open days with portable sensors and calibrated runs. The technician just wants permission to post raw counts with uncertainties so the arguments can move from rumour to residuals. Each motive is ordinary. Together they create a knot hard to pull without fraying something else. You hear a soft conversation through a thin wall. 2 staffers compare notes on traveller numbers after last year's headlines. They agree that myth moves more tickets than a peer review stamp. Then they say nothing for a while. They know that one sharp leak can ignite a frenzy online before anyone can correct a decimal. They also know that a vacuum invites louder stories. Between those 2 risks sits the headache of real stewardship. The file room lights twitch, then hold steady. A tray of metal seals clinks as an archivist shifts them to a higher shelf. She opens a drawer, checks the binding and closes it again. She is not hiding a grail. She is maintaining a system designed to drip, not flood. In the hallway, the thermostat clicks. The air grows a degree cooler. The rhythm is practical, a calm defense against sudden moves. There's also a quieter thread that never reaches the memos. Some whisper that certain patterns under the plateau touch nerves outside archaeology. Others dismiss that idea as a story chasing its own tail. The truth, perhaps, is simpler. Information that rearranges the past rearranges budgets, titles, and maps. A new map redraws more than lines on paper. It shifts who gets to hold a key. The guard steps into the courtyard where dust lifts in a slow sheet on the evening breeze. Across town, locked iron gates cross a short tunnel at the edge of a fenced lot. The bars throw long shadows that stretch and soften as the sun drops. Behind them, the air feels a degree cooler. A faint recording of the pyramid's low note threads through the scene from a phone in someone's pocket. It rides the air for a breath, then fades. Even with gates closed, sound finds tiny seams, and the question slips through with it. You enter on bare feet so the stone doesn't echo. The air is cool and a little dry, with a faint mineral bite of old granite. A cable brushes your ankle. On the slab, a volunteer sleeps under a thin blanket, chest rising slow. Electrodes dot their forehead and temples like small silver coins. A tablet glows near the floor, graph lines drifting in soft waves. The speakers, hidden in the corners, breathe a single tone that feels more like pressure than sound. It is steady, it is low, it gathers in the ribs and settles behind the eyes. The technician checks a stopwatch and nods. The tone slides toward a frequency measured here in more than one survey, landing near 110 cycles per second. The air doesn't get louder, it tightens, as if the room itself learns to hold its breath. The graph on the tablet smooths. Alpha bands swell, and then, gently, a bridge forms into slower theta waves. Time starts to feel thick. A minute stretches. Breath sinks to a rhythm the clock doesn't keep. No one speaks because speech would feel wrong in a place tuned like an instrument. Others dismiss this as suggestion. The power of place can nudge the mind. Yet the electrodes have no romance. They sketch the shift in clean lines. Across multiple sessions and different people, the pattern repeats. Relaxation, focus, and a drift in how long a moment feels. Some blink at the end and ask how long they were gone. The number they guess rarely matches the stopwatch. In the half-dark, a researcher eases down onto the granite, shoulder to the block, one hand open against the polished face. She closes her eyes as the tone returns. Later, she whispers, barely moving her lips, "It's not loud, it's inside you." A small sentence, but you can see her body soften as if the sound has melted around her bones. She's testing the old claim that a chamber like this doesn't just carry acoustics, it couples with you, body as receiver, room as tuner. Ancient lines on damaged walls and in temple texts speak of sound that awakens stone, of becoming the sound of Ra. Some whisper those phrases were not only metaphor, maybe they recorded a state of mind shaped by architecture and tone. The idea is delicate, it can snap under overreach. But a growing body of modern work on acoustic therapy and brain entrainment gives it a narrow ledge to stand on. Certain frequencies coax the nervous system into repeating patterns, calmer breaths, slower heartbeats, steadier focus. If resonant tones can steer the brain, the chamber's constants, the tight dimensions, the hard granite, the fixed nodes of vibration start to read like dials. Supporters suggest that in a charged atmosphere the effect might go further. If hydrogen once filled these rooms, as some models propose, powerful sound could push that gas into an ionized state. Plasma is a fourth state of matter, charged, responsive. In labs, plasma glows. Light and sound can meet there. Historical tales of inner light may trace back to that junction where air remembers electricity. You can trace a clean path from headphones to hospital rooms to this stone box. Binaural beats and rhythmic pulses are used to help sleep, focus and mood. MRI scanners, as loud as drums, create harmonics that many patients describe as trance-like. BrainSync is not a cult. It rides measurable pathways through the auditory system into networks that set our sense of time and calm. Here, the tone folds along granite planes and returns as standing waves. A human, placed in the middle, is not a bystander. We are soft tissue in a hard-tuned cavity. On the tablet, coherence maps bloom. When the tone sits around 110 Hz, alpha gains strength. In some runs, theta rises with it, which usually points to meditation and the dreamy edge of sleep. Faces relax. One subject reports short bursts of white behind closed eyes, like distant lightning that never cracks. Another notes a thin thread of quiet that seems to run under thoughts. Later, when the logs are cleaned, those flashes line up with small peaks in the readout. The match isn't perfect, but it's not random either. Critics counter that any impressive room can change mood, and that's true. Cathedrals calm, caves awe, low ceilings crowd. Still, the repeatability matters. The chamber responds at specific tonal marks. The echoes hold for long seconds. Field notes from past centuries mention dizziness, euphoria, and a feeling of pressure near the ears in the long hallway below. Modern acousticians call this infrasound effect. It can tip the senses and bend time perception. The phenomena sit within known physics. The question is whether they were harnessed on purpose. Let the frame widen. Earth makes a natural background beat, a slow electromagnetic pulse known to cluster around a few hertz. Some measurements inside this complex capture subaudible fundamentals that nod toward that range. If a chamber echoes both a human-centered tone like 110 Hz and a foundation tone near the planet's own, you get an odd duet. One voice meets the body, the other brushes the environment. The pairing might be coincidence, it might be design, it might be both, if architects learned by listening. A man in his 30s lies for his turn. He keeps his hands flat as told, so muscles don't twitch. The tone rises from the floor through his shoulder blades and into his jaw. He forgets to swallow, then remembers. Later he says the room felt lit, but not by light he saw. He cannot prove any of it. He doesn't try. He asks to sit up slowly so he doesn't tip back into whatever that was. The technician smiles, not unkindly. First-time drift is common. Supporters suggest the chamber could have been more than a room for the dead or a vault. They sketch a device that blends chemistry, vibration and human presence. Hydrogen thick in the air, sound sculpted to nodal lines, charged granite amplifying every touch of stress, the atmosphere turning faintly conductive. Under those conditions, a person inside does not just hear sound. They stand inside a tuned field where every cell is part of the circuit. The tales of a lighthouse or a place of ascent may carry a memory of the way that field felt. Not a beam or a miracle, but a union of phenomena that our language splits apart. Light as ion glow, sound as pressure, mind as pattern that can be nudged. It's one thing to read myth. It's another to find its scaffolding in stone and measurable tone. A few trials attempt a simple overlap. Breathe at a slow count while the tone holds steady. Heart rate trackers show a lag, then a catch, then a lock. The room's response feeds back in faint echoes. Breath finds them. The loop tightens. The subject reports a sense of being held. Not by hands, by timing. When the tone drops, the afterring hangs like thin mist, then fades. The subject blinks as if returning from a long walk. It leads to a larger thought. If a community knew how to use places like this at certain seasons, when underground water swelled and the stone spoke more strongly, they might regulate stress and fear and anger without doctrine. Harmony as a practice, not a rule, and if that tuning matched background planetary rhythms, you get a social tool that rides the same slow beat as the ground you stand on. Of course, it cuts both ways. If the tone slips or conditions change, the beneficial effect can wobble. Some whisper that failure to keep the rhythm could tip mood toward anxiety. That would match those old warnings about rituals performed in correct measure. Precision is not pomp, it can be safety. You step closer to the granite and lay your palm on its cool face. A faint charge prickles your skin. The tone holds even, and the mind steadies with it. This is where the speculation settles into a human question. The lost frequency might be no single number, but the match between architecture, geology, and mind. If that match once guided gatherings under these stones, it speaks to a form of care we barely remember. The tone drops to silence so gradually that you don't notice until breath sounds loud again. A clock beeps. The volunteer on the slab stirs and smiles, eyes still closed. Outside, the desert air waits, and the long corridors breathe their own slow rhythm. Who chose to let this music stop, and what returns if we let it rise again? The room smells like hot solder and dry marker ink. Afternoon light spills across chipped desks where teenagers lean over a plastic pyramid wired with copper tape. An aquarium pump hums under the table, sending a thin stream through clear tubing that wobbles when someone laughs. Quartz pebbles sit in a shallow tray, cold and milky, waiting their turn. A girl with sleeves rolled tight pinches a hose clamp and nods at the boy holding a cheap tone generator. He dials the knob to a soft throb near 50 cycles. The windows rattle just a little. No one talks over it. They feel it in their chests. Water starts. A silver thread runs the tube and taps a small plate. The tone meets the flow. The voltmeter jitters, then steadies, then trembles again with each pulse like a heartbeat in the wire. The needle isn't dramatic. It wiggles, barely above zero, but it moves on cue. A boy barks a short, surprised laugh and then clamps his mouth, as if he might scare the reading away. The pump warms the table. The generator's case vibrates against the wood. The teacher rests a finger on the meter's frame to quiet a buzz and lets the kids soak in the pattern that repeats. They didn't expect it to line up with anything beyond the classroom, yet the voltage spikes land in rhythm with the tone they set and the water pressure they tuned. Not a trick, just cause and effect running through plastic and stone chips. When the generator sweeps past the low band, the meter flutters harder. When they cut the water, it calms. When they bring both back together, the tiny signal returns, like a shy animal peeking from a hedge. The teacher takes one step back and says almost softly, "If we can do this with spare parts, imagine what they accomplished with perfect stone." The room goes quiet in a warmer way, like someone just dimmed the lights on purpose. From there, the frame widens. Engineers out in the world are testing roads that harvest vibration through piezoelectric slabs buried under asphalt. Trucks pass and grains inside each tile strain and release, squeezing out a thin charge. It isn't magic. It's pressure turned into current. The same principle the class watched on their little meter. In mountain towns, small hydrosonic turbines sip water from fast streams and use the swirl itself to drive power with almost no drop. On lab benches, prototypes sit that try to pull energy from subtle gravitational shifts, amplifying tiny mechanical motion into something measurable. Each project leans on resonance, on cycles harnessed rather than forced. The kids add quartz discs to their model. They press a copper strip tighter to the pyramid's side and wipe a bead of stray water with the cuff of a hoodie. The needle nudges higher when the tone finds the sweet spot. That hush across the desks carries a thread of wonder, but also the itch to tweak. They change the tube length by 2 fingers. They tilt the tray so the flow splashes against a curve. Small changes matter. The generator's low note becomes less audible and more felt, the way a subway is heard through a wall. Beyond the classroom, the same ideas turn towards service. In villages where the grid falters, micro-resonance boxes sit on clinic shelves. A nurse starts a pedal pump. The membrane inside flexes at a steady rate and a coil harvests it. A lamp powers on without complaint. In another place, a water can move through a field unit that sends a narrow sound band into the stream. The vibration helps settle grit, improving the filter's job. It isn't a cure-all. It's one step closer to clean light and safe water, tuned to what the land offers at gentle scale. Supporters suggest this is the line that connects old stonecraft to modern care. Not every test ends with cheer. Sonic surveys near fragile ruins have set off tiny quakes when tones stack where faults already wait. The signals were small, the ground answered anyway. In a rented hall, a team tried infrasound for mood therapy. The speakers filled the air below hearing. Several people felt dizzy. One sat down and cried without knowing why. Critics counter that chasing resonance without deep maps can turn helpful energy into a hazard. The kids in the classroom glance at their own speaker and keep it low, eyes meeting over the meter, as if the needle might warn them before anything gets strange. Consider the builders from long ago the way you'd consider careful gardeners. Power from alignment, not conquest. A system that draws from Earth's slow cycles the way a sail draws from wind. No wires, no fuel, just tuned spaces doing work because the world already moves. Some whisper this approach is less about extraction and more about equilibrium. If so, then a pyramid was not a battery to drain, but an instrument to play in time with the ground. There is a darker strand. When the tuning is lost, the benefits can slide. Drought follows flood. Stored water goes sour. Fields change yield. Stories grow sharper at the edges when food is scarce. The record falls silent at times when you'd expect noise. Supporters suggest that forgetting the settings, angles, lengths, tones, could break a web that once eased the pressure between soil and sky. Others dismiss such links as romance laid over hard history. The meter in the classroom doesn't answer either way. It only flickers when the knobs find the right combination. The teacher moves through the desks with a slow step. She knows that science is a ladder of careful rungs. Proof takes patience. Still, she watches the way the kids lean into cause and effect and sees how ideas travel faster when hands get involved. She talks about roads that pay for their light by listening to traffic, about turbines that sing to the stream that feeds them, about labs where gravity's whisper is coaxed a little louder. The kids nod and trade places at the pump. In a clinic at the edge of a desert, a solar panel dims behind a cloud. A small resonance unit hums on. The midwife checks a heartbeat under a lamp that doesn't flicker. In a mountain village, a teacher primes a water purifier and lifts a cup. The taste is flat, which is good. Mineral, not mud. The people who built the old monuments didn't drill oil. If they had an energy idea, it likely came from the same soil their bricks touched. That thought, even a speculation, has a calm gravity to it. Back at the desks, the kids try a new thing. They change the tone by a few hertz and the needle drops. They switch to the old setting and the wiggle returns. A boy writes the value on tape and sticks it to the model's side. The note looks like a label on a museum piece, but the glue smells like school. The teacher asks them what one test they would fund if they could. The answers range from a larger granite plate to a better pump, to time in a quiet chamber to listen for long echoes. Each answer is practical. None needs a miracle. The caution returns for one more pass. If monuments were tuned devices, then retuning without maps could disturb more than it helps. It's easy to chase the glow of a theory and forget the weight of rock and water and people living nearby. The classroom feels the word responsibility at a small, safe scale and lets it settle. Even so, you can feel a thread running from those desks to stones older than paper. The thought that waking the machine might wake memory carries an odd warmth. Not only power in watts, but a sense of how to live inside rhythms rather than against them. The needle flutters in time with the tone, and someone breathes out long and slow, as if syncing with it by accident. 2 minutes later, the pump clicks off. The afterring in the plastic fades. The voltmeter idles at 0. The kids stretch their backs. The model sits there, still, waiting for the next hand to touch the copper. The world outside the windows keeps moving, cars and wind and human plans. The pyramid's great hush might not be empty at all. It might be a pause between pulses, the way a heart rests before it contracts again. And if that's true, the question becomes whether we learn the timing, and how gently we choose to start the next beat. Night folds over the plateau with a slow breath. Air cools against your skin as the wind threads between blocks, carrying a dry hint of dust and faint stone. The lights of Cairo sit low on the horizon, like embers that refuse to die out. Above, constellations reappear in familiar ranks. They look the same as when the first crews hauled limestone at dawn, when orders were passed by hand signs and simple tools met stubborn rock. You stand at the edge of shadow where the desert holds its temperature like a memory. The Great Pyramid doesn't move, it doesn't argue. After scans and debates and crowded tables in Cairo coffeehouses, it stays put, a quiet mass that has outlasted every theory laid at its base. Some visitors bring small recorders. On nights like this, they claim to catch a low tone around 50 Hz. Others dismiss that as electrical noise from the city, a trick of wind or a generator a mile away. You feel more than you hear it. A pressure behind the ribs, the suggestion of a steady beat that may be nothing and might be everything. Stillness deepens into the kind of quiet that lets you sort the world into layers. There is the roll of a passing truck, thin and far. Then the air itself. Then the gap between those sounds, like a rest note held by careful hands. Supporters suggest that pause is not empty. It's charged, like the moment before a plucked string speaks. In that frame, the pyramid's hush feels less like absence and more like stored intent, a breath waiting for the next measure. A lone scientist works by headlamp near the north face, her backpack open, cables coiled and labelled. She shuts down her devices one by one, checking each switch with a thumb. The air smells faintly of sand and warm plastic. She lifts the recorder last. The level meter flickers, just above zero, a thin pulse that shouldn't be there if everything is sleeping. Her finger hovers over delete. Keep the anomaly and invite questions she can't yet answer, or clear it and avoid a storm. For a long moment, nothing moves but the tiny LED. She lets the night carry her choice and looks up towards stone stacked with stubborn accuracy. Deep below, scans now hint at cavities older maps had no room for. Within, chambers align with angles that make sound cling and fold. Traces on walls once passed off as stains now read like chemical ghosts to those who look longer. Granite reacts under stress with a small, exact spark. None of it alone explains the whole. Together the pieces begin to weigh on the mind like a chord that keeps returning, too structured to dismiss, too soft to claim as proof. Cultures fade, but their stones keep field notes in shapes and weights. Every era leaves a pattern, a mound aligned to a solstice, a causeway aimed at a vanished star. An amphitheatre tuned to a human voice without any wire. These are archives the weather cannot read, but we can. The pyramid in that sense is less a building than a method written in rock. It outlasts the words that would argue over it. When new eyes arrive, the method lifts again, the way a melody resurfaces in a later song, and we recognise it without knowing why. Maybe function has shifted with the centuries. If power once flowed here, through water, through gas, through stress and tone, its current job might be different. It might trade energy for wonder. It might trade output for attention. The monument returns the gaze we bring to it, a mirror that shows our hunger for pattern and our fear of error. Standing here, you feel the slow drag of time iron out ego. The corners don't care whether you believe. They've seen belief arrive in cycles, each with its own righteous breath. Patterns of secrecy make their own geometry. Locked drawers, restricted pits, data sets under password. It is easy to cast gatekeepers as villains, harder to accept that guarding can be a kind of engineering. A seal holds not to punish, but to preserve pressure. The pyramid's plugs and doors did the same. Some whisper that institutions model themselves on stone for a reason. They keep heat in. They keep storms out. They buy time for context to form, even if from outside the pause reads as refusal. But another kind of machine doesn't move parts. It moves people. Look at the faces that climb toward daylight after crouching inside the passageways. Listen to the field tech with sunburned lips replay a file and go quiet. Watch teenagers hold a quartz shard to a phone's flashlight and grin at the spark. The pyramid seems to recruit across ages, not with orders but with questions. Its circuits may now be made of curious hands and late-night searches, nodes linked by low conversations rather than shafts. You trace the stone with your palm, cool, slightly pitted. Grains catch light like stars trapped inside. If the older system truly hummed, the rock would have felt every cycle. Masons may have tuned by ear and by fingertip, reading loads as much as lines. Supporters suggest that such craft can be relearned only when we slow down long enough to listen again, for the tiny creaks after heat leaves, for the small charge you swear you feel when your wrist hair lifts against polished granite. Critics counter that skin lies. Both may be right. A camel pads past on soft feet, led by a boy who doesn't look up. Life wraps the sight without fuss. Tea cooks on a coil in a guard hut. A bus groans and stops, doors sighing open to let out a handful of night tour hopefuls. The world keeps doing what it does, the stones keep not doing. In that contrast, the pyramid's patience reads like a lesson no classroom can teach. Go steady. Build well. Assume you will not be understood for a long time. The scientist finally sets the recorder back in the bag. Not deleted, not published. A note instead, on paper, in a small, blocky hand. Anomaly. Check shielding. She tightens the straps, rubs the sleep from her face, and looks once more at the slice where casing stones once made a smooth skin. She seems smaller against the base, and the base seems larger for having held so much human worry without flinching. Her footprints curve away and blur in loose sand. Wind shifts. A thin after ring hangs in the air the way heat lingers after the stove turns off. You hear it, or you don't. That's the trick of thresholds. Some ears test limits, others need the quiet of 3 a.m. The pyramid sits between those thresholds, an instrument muted but not dead. If old channels exist, they may still carry the ghost of motion. Like a dry riverbed guiding wind in a straight line, the shape teaching the air how to move even without water. What if the present task is to teach patience back to ourselves? Not to switch on an ancient grid in a rush, but to rebuild the habits that could hold such a thing without breaking it. That means math learned by touch as well as sight. It means field notes written next to listening, not above it. It means letting mystery sit a little longer before naming it. Machines can be revived. Cultures have to be grown. A grey edge forms on the eastern horizon. The stone cools another degree under your hand. Birds start before the city does. Dawn is not loud here. It climbs one face first, faint gold spreading down steps that used to be a plain. In that slow reveal, you sense how many mornings this has been done, how often the same angles have cut the same light. We don't own that repetition. We get to witness it. The first beam touches the highest blocks and slides toward the ground. Your breath fogs once, then clears. In that crease between a fading night and a waking day, the question that pulled you here does not ask for an answer. It asks for attention. It asks for care. In the space between stone and sky, between known and unknown, the ancient question endures.